Ontario Tech University acknowledges the lands and people of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. We are thankful to be welcomed on these lands in friendship. The lands we are situated on are covered under the Williams Treaties and the traditional territory of the Mississaugas, a branch of the Greater Anishinaabeg Nation, including Algonquin, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. These lands remain home to a number of Indigenous nations and people. Annika knows I'm a huge fan of these CF mini conference. I think they epitomize what we can accomplish together as Omni partners, and I'm just really grateful to everybody who submitted proposals. And the real richness of these 9 sessions is what we're here for. So I'm going to just say thank you before we move on to those presentations to the planners, who are Jordan, Madeline, Annika, Colleen, Sarah, Randy, Monica, Jeff, and Liesl. Thank you so much for pulling this together. I think it's fantastic. And back over to you, Annika.
Thanks, Catherine. And I would second that thank you to everyone who is involved in every single way, including everyone who's attending today. This is the 3rd of our mini conferences, and I think that it's been a great way to sort of extend our day-to-day work and learn from each other. So the way that we'll run this today is that we have, as I mentioned, we have 9 presentations from members of the community across Ontario. We have a moderator for each session, so I would ask those who are presenting to raise your hand or turn your camera on if you are going to use your camera, so we can bring you to the top of the list of people, so I can make sure to spotlight you. And then I will ask the moderator to introduce and to monitor the chat for questions. So we'll have questions at the end of each presentation, but there will be a bit of time at the end of the entire mini conference for any additional questions or sort of cross-pollinated questions from different presentations. We will be having a short 15-minute break. I think it's at 10:45 to 11, so we'll have some time there for that. And I think that is all. So I will hand over to Madeline Donnelly now, who is the chair of the CF Communications Working Group, to kick off our first session.
Hello, as Annika mentioned, I'm Madeline, and I'm excited to moderate our first presentation, which is going to be presented by Joanna Whitson and Sue Aruda at the University of Waterloo. And it is called Alma Primo Governance at UWaterloo, Information, Communication, Collaboration, oh my. So with that, Joanna and Sue, take it away.
Thank you. I will just get things set up for my slides. Right, can you see my screen there?
Yep, we can see it. Just needs to be present.
There we go. All right, thank you. Today, Sue and I would like to share a bit about where we have gone with Alma governance since Alison Hitchens and I last spoke to you at the mini spring conference about our governance model. So after discussing and gathering information from all of our colleagues, one of the issues that was sort of echoed across all groups was the need for more organization around information. So this is sort of where this grew out of. So today we want to talk a little bit about our governance structure and sort of how communication is flowing within that structure. Then we'll outline some of the communication and information problems that were identified by our colleagues. And from there, we'll give an overview of the communication plan and some of the key aspects we identified while sort of going through this communication plan process. And lastly, we'll sort of finish up with how we applied some of these principles in practice to help streamline our information flows.
Okay, so this diagram provides an overview of our structure and the lines of communication. The co-leads are responsible for coordinating OCUL CF communications between library units, and Joanna and I are currently serving as the co-leads. So we establish policies and practices relating to communication that make sure the right people are getting the right information. We facilitate discussions regarding the prioritization of tasks in consultation with appropriate working group and divisions. And we report back to our AUL Allison to keep her informed of developments and initiatives and also to seek her input. The functional leads are the experts in their areas of activity, such as acquisitions, fulfillment, resource sharing, cataloging, and so on. And they're responsible for digesting, disseminating, and reporting on the information relating to their unit, including new releases, voting on enhancements, and developing workflow processes and procedural documentations. Area supervisors work with their functional lead to implement the changes, establish policies and best practices, and communicating them to the department members. And in some cases, the area supervisor is the same person as the functional lead.
So working with the functional leads, we identified that one of the major concerns was managing this flow of information. Although we were familiar with working within the TUG consortium, moving to sort of this evolving LSP model that like Alma and Primo, where you have these new features constantly becoming available and there's new information always coming out, it sort of changed some of our prior communication pathways. Initially, this was largely experienced as being a problem of just too much information and information overload. But when we dug down, we discovered that there was actually also quite some information gaps. So we really had sort of this two-sided issue with both the volume of incoming information feeling fairly heavy, but at the same time, there was a sort of a lack of communication and coordination in some of the other areas. Some of the feedback that we received was that information coming in wasn't always relevant to the people receiving it. Information comes from many sources, so we have to sort of stay on top of all of the internal, the OCUL CF, the ex-Libris communication, all sort of coming simultaneously, as well as colleagues just not feeling like they really had the time they needed to read deeply, digest, and implement the content that was coming out. In terms of information gaps, we identified that we didn't always have clear channels for communicating or, know who should be informed when making changes to processes, understanding new, undertaking new projects and making sure that all of the right people are involved, or have ideas we want to play with, especially understanding when something needs to be an internal decision versus when it needs to be brought to OCUL CF committees or escalated to ex-Libris. So just understanding at what level is this having an impact. Related to this as well, it was sort of procedure during implementation. Once we shifted into sort of this ongoing operations, we'd fallen out of the habit of having a centralized place to document decisions. This relates sort of to our in-house repository and the need to shift our documentation from being, sort of an implementation perspective to meeting the needs of our ongoing operations. And lastly, colleagues also expressed that it wasn't always clear who would act on an action item. So often they sort of now fall between functional units because Alma sort of has changed, how we work in different areas. And more than one colleague receive a communication that's sort of related to their area of expertise. The time is kind of spent communicating about, hey, who's going to get back to this? Or there'd just be a failure to respond when, you assume somebody else had it and, they didn't. So the communication plan is a living document. It's used to set the standards for how and when communication takes place, and it sort of acts as an agreement between all stakeholders so that everybody's sort of aware of the expectations for communicating and make sure that everyone has an understanding of sort of what are these larger goals we're trying to achieve. So a well-established communication plan, it just introduces consistency to communication and messaging, and it ensures that everyone is receiving the appropriate information to enable their engagement in the project. The format can really vary based on your individual needs, but common aspects to include are the purpose, the objectives, what approach you will be using, who you are communicating to, and then sort of what are the key messages you're hoping to get across through this. And we'll elaborate on each of those further in the next slide.
So based on the needs of our colleagues, we determined that a formal communication plan was needed to support all staff with gaining an understanding of Alma governance communication responsibilities and how we will work with departments, the communication team, OCUL CF partners, and ex-Libris support. This includes creating clear expectations about how we will communicate and the specific technology that is appropriate for the situation. One example of an information and communication flow that we have established in consultation with the functional leads is that our functional leads will submit the Salesforce tickets to ex-Libris on behalf of their areas of activity, and they will include our general system administrator in the communications to make sure communications are streamlined and all parties are kept informed of outstanding and resolved issues. So the key objectives of our communication plan are to make sure the right people are getting the information that they need, and we minimize the amount of information overload or details that don't pertain to their work. To organize documentation with ensuring everyone has access to current resources. To ensure that communications requiring action are assigned and completed by the appropriate ALMA governance role. And to keep records of decisions as appropriate, and in some cases as required by our record management guidelines. And managing information overload and minimizing cross-posting while ensuring that important communications are highlighted and colleagues have the necessary time to review them. Our aim is to establish appropriate, proactive, upward and downward communications with co-leads, functional leads, ex-libris, and OCUL CF. To ensure the right people receive the information they need, ALMA co-leads and functional leads will act as a filter and will distribute information within their relevant areas, both to colleagues and to supervisors. ALMA functional leads gather information from the relevant areas and OCUL CF committees to share with the governance group. We identify communication channels and specific technologies that are appropriate for the various modes of communication and managing the information flow, depending on if it's a two-way request for feedback or a one-way broadcast of information. Setting parameters around the specific types of communication and how we will use them is important, so colleagues know how they can engage. An example of this is the established guidelines we all have for submitting Salesforce tickets to ensure for issues with ALMA and Primo functionality. The communication plans includes timeline expectations for when and whether people will respond, such as when and how often to hold meetings, and the time frames involved with having testing teams or scheduling time in your own calendar to review release notes and vote on enhancements prior to the official release.
So identifying your stakeholders is an important step for ensuring that everyone is receiving the appropriate information and stays up to date on the project. We broke this down into a few different categories that each have different communication and information needs. So our internal communication partners include our functional leads, who are really our closest relationship, who receive a lot of back and forth communication based on sort of their designated roles as being experts and decision makers around all of this. We also communicate with our staff, but this tends to be more FYI broadcast types of information. So things like training opportunities or policy changes, things like that. For if staff do want to communicate with the governance group, typically they will go up through their functional lead as sort of, their filter, because if it's something the functional lead can handle on their own, it doesn't need to come up to governance for a bigger decision. That's sort of just a better way to assess that. We also have our affiliate colleges who share our UWaterloo instance, and really we need to make sure that they're being kept up to date on changes and that they're informed of everything going on. We do have a member serving as a functional lead, so we do have that channel for communication, but just really making sure that we have thought about everybody who is in our ALMA instance and making sure that they're brought along with that. And then we also have our library executive, and since they're overseeing all of the operations, we really do need to make sure that they are informed of what's going on. So it's great that we do report directly to our AUL, who then sort of filters things up to them as necessary. And then we also have our external communication, which includes ex libris, and this sort of looks like responding to calls for feedback, meeting with representatives, escalating tickets, and things like that. And then we also have the OCS consortial partners, and we can communicate with them through things like participating on committees, making sure that changes relating to policy are brought to the correct group, and just being involved in the community of practice. And then in terms of our campus and community communications, we made the decision that we would share information with our communication team. So things like making sure they're aware of timelines, the importance, who they can reach out to for consultation on a topic, and then they're responsible for sort of writing, approving, and distributing those kind of communications to our broader community. So the key messages that we were hoping to clarify with our communication plan is making sure that all of our colleagues are aware of who has responsibility for what aspects of governance. keeping all of our staff engaged and up to date on information around enhancements, policy changes, and opportunities for feedback, making sure that we're reaching our colleagues across the different campuses and units to ensure consistency with policy and processes, and also that they're aware of any changes that will have an impact to their work. And another thing is just sort of making sure that we have those channels and creating them for participation in work sort of across the library units as well as across OCUL CF to make sure that, everybody is aware of, hey, what's going on right now? How can we collaborate together for better outcomes? And just, making sure that when we make a change, we understand, hey, that actually has an impact for analytics, or that has this impact over here. So just making sure that we are all informed about those things, even if they don't seem directly related. And then lastly, just making sure that, we are making use of those opportunities for feedback and learning and things like that as they come out, and that everybody's informed. So in terms of practical application, this is just sort of a sample of some of the changes we've made or will be rolling out soon based on the development of this communication plan. One thing is that we took time to identify sort of what is the appropriate communication channel for different types of information and setting standards around that. So one specific example is that we've decided to use a ticketing system for all ALMA Primo requests. Previously, some things would come as questions through emails or chats or conversations, etc. And it was creating some sort of challenges, keeping track of what all we needed to be working on and what needs to be done, and how you kind of assign priority when you have things sitting in multiple different communication formats. So we just sort of decided, let's put everything through one place, and that way we can better prioritize. If at your institution you don't have a ticketing system, something you could consider are things like, having an email tagline, so that way you can quickly filter things if it is, an ALMA request, and just sort of creating some standardization around that can be really helpful. Another thing that we have done is creating topic-based chat channels, and these are just rolling out now. But some examples of this include having a chat section for, things I noticed in the ALMA Primo release notes. So this is where you can kind of highlight aspects of the update or have conversations around what are the potential impacts, or hey, are there things we want to shift in our practices that would help us utilize this better? So just sort of having some conversation around that to help people really reflect and think deeply on it. Another chat channel is changes to procedures. So this sort of is just an opportunity to broadcast, hey, we're making this change, making sure everybody's informed that this is happening. And it also helps think through some of the broader implications, and other units can provide insights and things like that, just based on their perspective of the the change. And the last one is help with its issue or decision. And this is where we can share different questions and concerns with the functional leads, get their insights or solutions, or just sort of get that kind of solidarity when you're going through a struggle. This also really helps to flag and think about when is it that we need to be escalating things beyond our institution, and making sure that we are getting sort of broader perspectives on some of these problems. Another thing that we have been looking at doing is making sure that everybody who is responsible for reviewing the release notes is sort of booking some time and setting that aside in their calendar to test the changes, read through it, understand it, and decide what needs to be implemented. If you are finding it consistently challenging to really engage in the release notes and stay involved in them, one option is to delegate. If you can put together sort of a team, recruit some colleagues in your area who would have the skill to review the notes, and then sort of, just flag when there is something that we want to do further investigation on. So that's something we have been talking to the functional leads about, is just, how is it that we can make this, easy to keep up to date on. And then in terms of next steps, we will be updating our centralized repository to make it more useful in our post-migration environment. So as I mentioned before, we just really want to make sure that our documentation is all in one place, it's easily accessible, and that it really has the lens of ongoing operations rather than, and cleaning up all of that stuff that was sort of residual from the migration. So communication is a constantly evolving need, and we expect that our approach will continue to change over time. But we found the process of really teasing out what our communication needs are through writing a communication plan really helpful for identifying the issues and potential solutions. And really making our approach clear to colleagues, reduce some of the uncertainty and the mental impact that contributed to this sense of information overload. So it's just overall has been, a positive experience to sort of think this through more strategically. So that's all I had to say about that, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
So if anybody has any questions, feel free to add them to the chat. And thanks, Joanna and Susan, that was really excellent. And I didn't even have to give a 2-minute warning because you wrapped up right on time.
Perfect.
I can start off with a question. So you talked a lot about these functional leads, and on one of your slides, it was showing how the functional leads share information with the area supervisor. So I'm assuming the supervisor isn't always the functional lead. So how did you fill those roles? Do they kind of relate to your organizational structure? Is it always the same person, or are they rotating? Can you talk a little bit more about those functional leads?
Yes, so basically what we did is we met with all of these different units, and generally we met with the department head or people who they identified as being, sort of key ALMA decision makers. And from there, we sort of developed together a list of, hey, who has decision-making power, who has sort of, I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for, but they were really tapped into ALMA, and they had responsibilities relating to this, and things coming out of OCUL CF or things coming out of Ex Libris would impact their work. So just sort of understanding who is already being touched by everything going on. So that was sort of how we had a conversation, identified, hey, who is actually really strongly involved and needs to be in these rooms making these decisions and things like that. So that's sort of the model we went with. In some cases, it is a department head or a supervisor or, just a staff member who, just is involved in this way.
Thanks. Jeff?
Thanks, Madeline. One of the things that I really appreciated in the implementation was how much information Harvard made public on their wiki. I was wondering how much provision there is in the communication plan for sharing information outside of CF.
We didn't specifically look at that. It is sort of a longer term goal. I think with looking at our documentation, it more comes out of there. At this point, we were really looking more at the interpersonal communication rather than the larger documentation type of communication. So it is definitely something sort of on the radar, but not within the scope of what we did here.
Thank you.
We have a question in the chat from Dan. How much has the adoption of OCUL CF highlighted previously unnoticed power structures?
That's a very interesting question. One thing I think it has definitely done is sort of broken down the boundaries between departments in a lot of ways, because what used to belong in one department now is like, because ALMA is so flow focused, like you start on a process and it sort of guides you through how that process should work. Whereas, we were previously on Voyager where it's like you have your module and you do things within this module and only these people have access to the module. So it's a very, very different sort of, it pushes you through a flow, is at least how I experience it. And so where those flows kind of go don't necessarily stop at the boundaries of departments. So that's something I've really noticed, is that I wouldn't necessarily call it power structure so much, but just that we sort of need to learn how to work together in different ways and to say, it doesn't make sense to do this over here anymore. Let's move that over here and let's shift things around a bit. So in that way, I think we are somewhat working more closely with different people. And, there are colleagues who, because they have so much knowledge around how things work in ALMA and how things work in our institution, they're really relied on for their expertise, regardless of sort of where they fall within the, the university library structure. So it has been sort of interesting. I would say definitely I experienced it more with the boundaries of departments rather than, a breakdown of hierarchy kind of structure. But yeah, that is a very interesting question, and hopefully I've answered it.
I'm going to ask this one last question that came through on chat, and then we'll wrap it up. So from Mark, How have you planned for urgent communications, such as unplanned downtime? There was an incident like this a couple of weeks ago.
So generally those do come from our system administrator, just because they are, right involved there in the moment, and are able to send that out quickly. I don't know that we necessarily really thought about, that aspect of things, because that has generally been going well for us. That, we get those communications out just through sort of, our grassroots kind of how things have been operating. But yeah, no, we didn't specifically plan on channeling through Alma governance. So, it just sort of fell within the role of our system administrator. But we may need to go back to the drawing board with that one.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, thanks Joanna and Susan for your great presentation. And I'm going to pass it off to the next moderator, who is Jeff.
Hello. Next session we have is the Rialto implementation, good, annoying, and relevant, featuring Liesl Schoner-Saunders from Algoma and Evelyn Feldman from Lakehead University. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session. My name is Liesl Schoner-Saunders, and as Jeff has just said, I'm an academic librarian at Algoma University. I'm just going to switch. Sorry, I'm just making sure that I have everything organized properly. I'm just going to start with a land acknowledgement. So I wish to acknowledge that I am on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe Nation. I also acknowledge that I am on the sacred lands set aside for education as envisioned by Chief Shinwalk for our children and for those yet unborn. And before I'm going to pass it on to Evelyn, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background about Algoma. We're a very, very small school. We're the smallest in Ontario, but we still have 30 programs that we serve, and we have 3 faculty divisions. So that will kind of come into play throughout our presentation. Okay, thanks, Evelyn. Off to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Evelyn. Liesl, can you hear me, right?
I can hear you. Yep, you're good.
I want to also acknowledge that today I'm in Thunder Bay, which is located on the traditional lands of the Fort William First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. And I'm really grateful to be able to live and work on this land today. And I'm Evelyn Feldman. I'm the head of collection services at Lakehead University. We have an FTE of about 8,500, so we're not as small as Algoma, but we're still kind of small, and I would have thought of us as small in any other grouping, just about. We have 12 librarians, including myself, and now Liesl can introduce you to our topic today of Rialto.
Yeah, so I guess before we get into our slides, which are very simple, I just wanted to give a little bit of background of what is Rialto, for those of you who don't know. So Rialto is a book purchasing tool that allows you to purchase physical and electronic books integrated right into Alma. It is marketed as I just want to make sure I have this, a one-stop vendor neutral marketplace. So it's saying that it doesn't put any vendor above any other. And for the most part, I found pretty much any vendor or publisher that I've been looking for. So it's a pretty in-depth tool to use. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So please bear with me. Did that work?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. All right, okay, so let me present. So we've done that. All right, so at Algoma, for our context, we did have a single staff member who handled collections, and their job was to really find books. We didn't have any tools before Rialto. We had no collection tools. So this is all very new to us, using Rialto, which I mean is good and bad because we can set up our own processes and stuff. But it was before this one staff member would, rely on faculty requests, but also they had such a good internal knowledge of our collection already, so they could kind of identify gaps by themselves. Now this person has retired this June 2020 and has yet to be replaced. I mean, pandemic and all that, book purchasing kind of got a little bit messed up. So when we did we launched Rialto this fall, we did not have a staff person assigned to do collections, which created a problem in and of itself. But like Alma, Rialto also allows you to kind of assign different roles and access. So we have a number of our staff who have access to be able to just select and suggest titles for us. Part of my role has been to approve those selections, also create selections myself, create suggestion feeds, which I'll kind of go into a little bit later into my section, talking about what exactly selection feeds and templates are. So I've been doing that work as well, and general testing and experimenting, making sure that it's working, but also just kind of figuring out what are the kind of tools available to us with this, with Rialto, and making sure that we're using it as best as possible. And then, as I was saying, that because we didn't have a collection tool before and it was one staff member handling this kind of work, we're kind of at the position right now where we can create new processes and figuring out what's the best way to use Rialto and what systems are we using and who's doing what and how do we want to do this system. So we're kind of still figuring out, fleshing that out a little bit more, but we do have one particular staff member who's been doing great work suggesting titles for us, which has been amazing. And hopefully we'll get that metadata technician position filled in the near future again. And that will also help with this work as well. Do you want to go into your experience with Rialto at Lakehead?
Sure. Yeah, so at Lakehead, we have a liaison model, and we have subject funds assigned to each subject for selecting ebooks and books. So for example, one librarian might cover business, chemistry, and biology, and then would have 3 subject funds that they're responsible for, which I think is probably pretty common at a lot of places. So we're structured so that all of our librarians are subject liaisons, in addition to covering functional areas, except for me right now. Ironically, I have no subject funds. So we have 11 liaison librarians doing ordering for 32 subject funds. And before switching to Rialto, we were using ProQuest Oasis for ordering. So we're also a bit of an outlier among the people here because we weren't using Gobi. I also want to note that I'm not going to be that great at talking about the transition of what we were doing before, because I've been here for 6 months. So I started when we were partway through. I think I had a meeting with Rialto on day 2 of this job, and they were like, welcome, by the way, we're switching to this new system. And we did our first order on that meeting on my second day. So one thing I'll say is that we haven't had to use I haven't had to go into, I don't know how Oasis works really, because once we had Rialto running, we didn't really have to do much in Oasis. So the transition was quite easy and smooth. So our workflow at Lakehead, we have liaison librarians who are doing collection development. They have different ways they might do that through their own selecting or projects, or faculty members requesting or suggesting titles. And then the librarian goes into Rialto and finds the book, and they decide on the format and the license. And then they select it and send it to approval. And then we have an acquisitions technician who takes a look at the approvals every day and makes sure everything looks good in terms of how the order is filled out with fund codes and things like that, and then approves the order. So it's pretty standard, I think. And then for ebooks, after that, we don't have to do anything else until we get the invoice, because Alma takes care of everything. And the print books our cataloging technicians take care of once they get here. So it's all really smooth in Rialto, I would say. And actually, now that it's up and running, unless I'm ordering something myself, which I do occasionally do, I don't actually have that much to do with Rialto. It's going so smoothly. It's extremely hands-off, except for troubleshooting and answering questions, which have been decreasing as we've settled in, which I think is quite ideal in a book ordering platform, honestly. So in terms of how Oasis and Rialto compare, I did talk to some of our staff and librarians about how they feel the two compare. And I think the biggest difference I heard is that when we had Oasis, we had to go outside of Oasis a lot more. So we ordered from Midwest, I've been told, and from Amazon and various other sources a lot more when we were using Oasis, which created more work for liaison librarians having to look other places and more work for collection staff having to source things and do more work in Alma. Whereas now, basically, we almost never have to leave Rialto. When we had Oasis, librarians also had to check the catalog a lot more to see if we had things already. But since Rialto is so integrated into Alma, it will just tell you if something is in your institution right there. I had other things to say, but we have such a short amount of time today. I'll just hand it back to Liesl. There's so many little things you could get into.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh,
Okay,
wait, no, it's me now. Sorry. Okay.
It is you. Yeah, okay.
I'm moving on to my other topic, which is training and creating buy-in, which I guess is what we called it. So Liesl is at a smaller place where she's doing a lot of the selecting herself. But since we had a number of liaison librarians, I guess one of my first things when I started this job was getting them comfortable in using the new system. And I wanted to touch on this because it was a big part of the thing, the transition, but I don't have a lot to say because I found it really, really easy. Rialto is just really usable. I mean, like sometimes it's slow because Alma is just like that. But I think compared to Oasis, it's a lot more user-friendly based on conversations I've had. It's easier to find what you're looking for. You can filter the sort of, Rialto calls them offers, but like in Alma, everything is filterable. It's the same in the Rialto market. So if you only want to see unlimited user, for example, you can filter to that. So I think for getting people to switch was really easy. I just did a few sessions where I demonstrated selecting things and made some Lakehead specific documentation. The most, I don't know, challenging, it wasn't that hard, but the most challenging thing was getting set up, everyone set up using cart templates so that the carts would be filled out with all the right fields, like reporting codes. But again, that went quite smoothly. I just made some instructions. So yeah, there's not much to say. I'll just hand it back to Liesl so we maybe have time for questions in a demo.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So for Algoma, one of our big concerns about switching over to Rialto and was kind of our kind of sticking point when we were talking to ProQuest was about Canadian and Indigenous content specifically. Algoma has a special mission to and a strong has a special mission to focus on Indigenous studies and cross-cultural learning. So this was a really important point for us. And I will say that during the implementation process, ProQuest was like asking us for some title examples of things that we'd be looking for. Also just they wanted some examples of publishers to see if they don't already have those books or those publishers in their system. So they were really open to that and working with us. And I will say, so far, I think there's only been a couple books that we haven't actually been able to find in Rialto. So I know we've been pretty impressed. So kind of along those lines, what I've been kind of working on is creating feeds, which are basically curated lists that you can kind of create to make suggestions of purchases. So you can make them based on topic, which is when it kind of been more my focus, but you could do it as well. Like I only want books published after this point. So there's a lot of ways you can manipulate the list yourself. And you also have control over the ranking system of that list as well. So you can control the order of those lists and how they're organized. And yeah, so what offers are being prioritized in the list kind of idea. So I've been experimenting with how to do this with Indigenous studies. I will say that it works okay. Definitely not perfect. Some of the results that I'm getting are a little bit strange. And so it's definitely still needs some tweaking. But for the most part, it's been pretty decent. Yeah, and I mean, I can show you later if we get to that point and we have time. But it's been like some weird ones of like a little bit more of a colonial perspective than what I was expecting. So it works, I will say, but needs some work. Yeah, the only wish that I had was in the feeds, I'm able to say, okay, I want items that were published in a Canadian context or like by a Canadian publisher, so I can add that geographical context that way. I wish that I was able to do that instead in the rankings, because in that way I can like push the Canadian content higher up on my suggestion feed, rather than if I have it in, if I'm putting the Canadian filter in the feed, it means that I will exclude anything that's American, or in case of Indigenous studies, like Australian sometimes is relevant too, right? Like I don't want to completely get rid of those. I just want them to be farther down. So that was kind of the one thing that we were a little bit annoyed with. I mean, it's not even that big of a deal. The other one that we found was that occasionally we found titles for quite a bit cheaper on Amazon than Rialto. And I will give another shout out to our staff member who, when he's making suggestions, not only checks Rialto, but also checks the title on Amazon for me. So it does that work twice just to confirm, like compare the prices. And I mean, we've only been at this for a couple months, but yeah, it's interesting to see the difference there. I'm just trying to think. Yep, I think that's pretty much everything we had. So we'll leave it open to questions, and if not, we can also do a demo as well. Ignore our little cheeky meme there. We actually do want your questions.
Thanks, Liesl. Thanks, Evelyn. I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anyone have a? If you could raise your hand if you have a question, please. One's come in from the chat from Katie Lai. Thanks for sharing. When you said Amazon is cheaper, are you referring to print books?
Yes, yeah, it was a print book. The one I'm thinking of specifically, Rialto, it was $210 for the print book, and Amazon it was $40. And that's a recent one. That was like last week that I saw. But it's like 1 in 10 kind of thing. It's not a huge deal, but occasionally it's like, oh, I think we'll just go for Amazon this time. The other problem is when you're implementing Rialto, they require your first year a certain amount of buy-in. So for us, it was almost our entire book budget, which was slightly problematic because we wanted to save some for if we needed to buy outside of Rialto. And so like that's the other thing, is like we're kind of stuck right now doing a lot of purchasing in Rialto to use that budget that we've committed. So
we have a couple more questions from chat. Does the platform provide any information concerning whether or not books are available in fully accessible formats?
It doesn't, from my experience. That would, because you can choose, especially for an electronic book, you can choose what platform you're doing. So, I mean, it will tell you if it's available at EBSCO, ebook, Central, Taylor and Francis, Brill. So if you know those platforms and which one you prefer for accessibility reasons, you can kind of pick and choose that way. But it doesn't have any notices about the accessibility of each vendor.
Thanks, Liesl. Question from Dan Scott. Is there a cost to implementing Rialto?
No cost. With Alma, you just have to have a certain buy-in, as I said, and I don't think you have to do it the second year. If I remember correctly, I think it's just like commit to the first year a certain amount of funds so that you get used to it and use their feeds and commit to it, and then I think after that you just pay for what you purchase.
Yeah, you agree to put a certain amount of money through in orders in a certain amount of time.
Yeah, and like I said, we negotiated ours because they were originally asking for an entire book budget, and we were not comfortable with that.
Thanks, Liesl and Evelyn. Michelle Conrad, do you have your hand up?
I do. I just wanted to mention that Nipissing also has Rialto, and we've had it for a while, but we were able to successfully implement it so that all of our orders were not automatically shared with the network zone, which was important to us. And they were reluctantly, but able to do so. So that was really good. So it gives us flexibility in cataloging, and it allows all our ebooks and everything it gives us a choice not to share with the network zone. And we found the same thing with you, that Rialto is very easy to work with. We haven't had, we've had a really good experience with invoicing and the POLs, and we haven't had too many issues with mismatched and not found records for our items that we already have in the catalog. So that was really good, and we're very happy with it as far as I know anyway.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And kind of along those lines too, I think the really cool thing about Rialto is it automatically shows you too, like it has a little like tag being like, this is in your institution already, or this is in your network. So, and then when you click on it, you can see what institutions also own that title. So you can use that when you're looking at purchasing suggestions right off the bat. It's a good way to kind of look at it. And you can also exclude those titles in the feed too. So there's some cool tools in there once you start getting into it.
It's a question from chat from Tony White. How is the buy-in level set?
What do you mean by that? Can you elaborate a little bit?
So you said that you have to dedicate a certain percentage of your budget, and they want the whole budget, and you want something less than that. Is that, do they give you a percentage, or how are they determining what level, right? Because each of us has, greater.
I think it wasn't based on a percentage. I think they just have a set, like you need to commit this funds. It just, because we're so small, the funds that they had set was our entire budget. But I don't know, I think from my understanding, it's just like a set, I think it was like 20,000 American, which ended up being about our entire book budget. I know, very sad, but
Right.
so I don't think it's based on a percentage.
Okay, I can appreciate that. We also have a very small budget at OCAD, so.
Yeah.
Okay,
So I will say they were open to negotiating it.
All right, great, thanks.
I think we're out of time now for questions. Sorry, were a few more in the chat, but maybe we can take those offline. Next up, we have Leganto. I'm just going to pass it over to the next moderator, and that is Monica Reddick from Brock University.
Thanks, Jeff. So I'll let our presenters get ready. Looks like they're very smooth there with the pulling up their slides. So good morning. So yeah, this is Monica Reddick here from Brock, acting as your moderator for the next session. And I'm just going to briefly introduce our presenters. One familiar face that we've already seen this morning, Madeline Donnelly from Lakehead. And we've also got presenting together with Madeline, Dwayne Collins from Trent. And the presentation title is Leganto, What We Have Learned from Implementing a New Electronic Reserve System. So as before, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat at any time during the presentation, and I'll be sure to either read them out at the end, or we'll let this question asker raise their hand at the end too. So with that, I'll pass it over to our presenters.
Great, thanks, Monica. So we're going to talk to you today about our experience implementing Leganto, but it's definitely not a pitch conversation, or at least we're going to try to not make it that way. But for those of you here who have never used Leganto before, or this is a new term, we do want to provide a brief overview of what it is. So what is Leganto? To summarize, it's an electronic reading list system that can embed directly with your learning management system at Lakehead, it's D2L, as well as with Alma and Omni. So this is what Leganto looks like. You can organize your reading list in many different ways, whether that's by week, by topic, by theme. When you expand a week to view your readings, they're presented in a very attractive looking way, with the title, with a little image of the cover art if it's available, as well as all of the information that's needed to create a citation. And when a student clicks on one of these resources, it'll open up the Omni record if it is an Omni item. One of the main kind of selling points of Leganto is that instructors can add resources to their reading list in a number of different ways. So in Omni, they can pin things to their collection and easily kind of transition them into Leganto. Within Leganto, you can search Omni and drag and drop items. You can upload your own files. And there's even this tool called the Cite It tool, which works really similarly to citation managers like Zotero. It's just a little extension. So if you're watching a YouTube video, you can hit Cite It and add it directly into your reading list. So lots of different ways to get that content into the reading list quite automatically. Still requires a bit of searching, of course, but maybe easier than before in D2L or Aries, depending on what you were using. The last thing I'll say about it is, from the library side, we can manage the reading list from Alma. So we can see things pop up in our task list when there's items to do, and we can manage all of the reading lists from this backside in this system that we're already using. Okay, so that's a very quick overview of the system itself, and I'm going to pass it over to Dwayne.
All right, excellent. So we're just going to take some time. Our agenda there for the rest of the session is there. We're going to talk about the context at each of our institutions, and then go over our similar goals, some lessons learned, and what our key takeaways are. And we've tried to structure this after our sort of institutional context as more of a conversation, just because we realized that there's a lot of similarities there, and it worked really well to sort of go off of each other's experience that way. So I think next slide, please. Just because, yeah, there we go. So I'm going to be talking about the implementation context at Trent University. So we can go to our next slide. So prior to Leganto, we did not have an e-reserve system of any kind. We did do some early investigations, and there, most of the concerns that were raised at that point in time were actually some concerns about library overreach and what it would mean for us to be involved in readings in this level for the first time. And as we get into our conversation later, this will come up a little bit more. Our course reading support, though, prior to Leganto was fragmented across several functional units. So we had reserves, copyright fair dealing assessment, liaison librarians who were helping with permalinks, acquisitions requests were being handled separately. In many ways, our faculty were having to actually submit their reading lists 3 or 4 times, depending on what they were trying to do. So that was one of the things that really was behind our implementation strategy, was trying to find ways to sort of simplify these workflows for both faculty as well as staff, because there was a lot of repetition that we sort of perceived there. Our implementation of Leganto took place in April 2020, but I will say that we were started the investigations earlier than that. The earlier investigations I mentioned about overreach, we actually talked about some sort of syllabus review or readings review back in 2019, but had delayed because we wanted to wait and see how Omni and the Collaborative Futures project sort of played out and do that within a new environment, in a new context. And so we were right on the edge of whether or not we were going to go with Leganto at the end of February of 2020. And then we all know what happened in March. And that really did sort of push us the rest of the way over into that, just because we felt that this was a tool that was going to become increasingly useful if we were going to be, at that time, I think we all felt that it was going to be a short term and maybe in and out of lockdown, and it all played out in the way it did. And we're currently now in year 2 of a 3-year contract. And we were, I believe, the first institution to actually go with the Leganto Now implementation, which was sort of a very light implementation approach from Ex Libris, as well as I don't have exact proof of this, but we were told that we were one of the, or if not the fastest implementation on record. We did our implementation sort of in about a month and a half to 2 months from start to sort of first course. And I was reviewing my notes and discovered that we were actually doing lists partway through our implementation. We really started getting going quite quickly. Next slide, please. So in our first year, we were relatively successful. We had 16% of offered courses using Leganto, and that's both our undergraduate and graduate courses. And we did some surveying at the end of the first academic year, and things were trending towards being a very positive experience for faculty as well as students. And then year 2 hit, and we actually saw a decrease in our participant numbers. And so we're at 11%, even though we have an increase in courses, there's a decrease, and there's a significant increase in anecdotal stories of frustration and dissatisfaction, which has led to us sort of having a lot more time now to sort of think about our implementation, and that will come out in the rest of our conversations about what that means. But we discovered something happened in those 4 months that made, between April and August, that made people less than thrilled with the world of Leganto. So, and I think I'll end our context piece there.
So a little bit about Lakehead. In addition to being adjacent to a river like Trent, we also didn't have a previous course reserve system. So in the past, really similar to Trent, instructors sent us the reading list, the library technicians took that reading list and kind of manually uploaded their citations into the learning management system. So this is an example of what it looks like. There was this library reserve module. We had to ask instructors not to move things out of this module, because if we got copyright clearance, for example, which is temporary, we have to restrict access at the end of the term. So we wanted them to leave it all in this little module, and for obvious reasons, that didn't work with everyone's pedagogy. Some people really like to integrate readings by week. and they couldn't do that with our previous system. It was also a lot of manual labor to upload and name these files in a consistent way, and as well to manually kind of go into each course shell at the end of the term and remove them. In addition, only 5% of our courses were using our course reserve system, which was about 125 courses. That being said, we are a smaller institution, so we were in many ways at capacity, especially because there's sometimes this influx of, say, 50 courses sending you reading lists in the last week or so before the next semester begins. So we're going to go into the goals in the next slide, but definitely there was a lot of labor required to maintain this manual system. And there was a lot of feedback that we received that the system wasn't working for everybody based on how they wanted to organize their courses. So we're currently wrapping up our first semester of implementation, and our goal for our first semester was to migrate all of the courses who had previously used our course reserve service onto the My Readings platform. So when they sent their list through, we kind of took those lists and replied and said, thank you so much for submitting your list. We're going to get you set up on our new system. We'll create the list for you. All you have to do is connect to your course site to Leganto, which we rebranded as My Readings to go along with all of our like institutional naming, like My Info and My Course Link. Anyways, I'm going to stick to Leganto so I don't confuse everyone. But really our goal was to get those courses who are already using our service utilizing this new system. And in the next phase, we wanted instructors to really take the lead on launching and creating, curating, maintaining their lists in Leganto, and we would just take it away in the back end and look at the resources and do what we needed to do if it's a digitization or purchasing copyright clearance. But we really wanted to kind of share the work of creating these lists with the instructors. So Dwayne and I have had a lot of conversations about our experiences, which has actually been really interesting and something I would love to continue to do. But through these conversations, we kind of identified that our two institutions had really similar goals in adopting this new system. So the one that really shone through, of course, is improving the student experience. So allowing their readings to be organized in a way that makes sense for the course, providing all the information even that's needed to create a citation. Before, if we scan chapter 2, it just said chapter 2. It didn't have all the information students needed to actually engage with that reading or cite it within their research.
Yeah, and in many ways too, as well, we were finding that students were maybe going to one particular vendor platform, but not another. So there was a real strong appeal with Leganto to be able to have those moments where we would be able to provide the full sort of breadth of what was available from the library as well. And then similarly, we also found that we also had a very strong push for instructor autonomy. That was a very clear message that we had right from the beginning, that instructors wanted to be needed to be in control, not just wanted, but needed to be in control of their reading lists, who could see them, how they were published, how they were put together. And there was a thread that we felt of concern about the library somehow overreaching, or that this would somehow be a management tool and not a readings tool or something that would support instructors in the classroom.
Yeah, really similar to kind of what I already highlighted as well. At least at Lakehead, they wanted a lot of autonomy to be able to arrange the readings in a way that made sense. And then, of course, increasing our capacity. We don't want to just support, 5% of courses. We want to have we want to be able to support much more. I think as well, talking to instructors about their readings opens the door to many other conversations, such as OER and making your readings accessible. So definitely we wanted to become more involved with more courses throughout the curriculum.
So lessons that we learned, instructor autonomy, while it was a really strong push, I'd say that one of the things that we learned is that there's such a thing as too much autonomy when it comes to Leganto. So one of the things that we've discovered is that in our approach to make sure that faculty were in control and had the ability to do all of these things, we inadvertently have probably pushed too much work onto faculty. We lost sight of that goal that, we're trying to also lighten workloads. We're trying to simplify things. We were aware of our technical load, but we didn't necessarily fully take into account the technical load of faculty and how much, especially in March of the spring of 2020, how much we were sort of saying, well, here's a new system that you have to learn. And we did a lot of work on teaching and how to use the system, but there was these moments where I feel like faculty really were being expected to do too much, and that because of the way it was framed, because we wanted to make that message clear that they were in control, it inadvertently also created the message that they couldn't ask us for help, even though we were more than willing to provide help, especially direct help. So it was led to some frustrations, I would say, that the library was not necessarily being as supportive as they could be. It was felt that we were inflicting Leganto upon some faculty rather than creating a tool that would be useful.
Yeah, I would say too at Lakehead, even though we got feedback that some instructors wanted more control, some instructors actually just really liked us accepting their list and uploading everything for them. That was really easy and took a lot of labor away from them. So with our goal of, you have to upload everything yourself, that was a really steep kind of transition. So it definitely was kind of shifting the labor away from the library, especially in this first phase where we were transitioning instructors who are used to just sending us their lists and us getting them all up into their learning management system.
Just about a minute or so remaining.
So quickly, one of the things that we realized with library workflows is while it did simplify things and lighten our technical load, it didn't necessarily mean less work. And, under the theme of work smarter, not harder, I don't know that we accomplished either of those at times, to be quite honest. As we all know, the overlapping sort of workflows in Alma can be a little frustrating. And so that was something we didn't take into account. And in the interest of time, maybe we'll try to move on to the key takeaways. One of the things I wanted to emphasize, and that came out in our conversations, was that Leganto as a tool, right? We fell into a trap, I think, at Trent in particular, that we made Leganto was the service rather than the tool to support the service. So we're actually in the midst and rethinking our approach for the year 3 to sort of take a step back and say, no, what is the service goals? What are we trying to do with course reading support? And how does Leganto fit that? Because Leganto is not necessarily the best choice for every faculty member. That's one of the things we learned, is that some faculty want to use their readings in particular ways, and if they use Leganto, it is going to directly work against what they're trying to accomplish in their Blackboard shells, and we need to be clear that they have different needs, and that what we're providing isn't the only way to do things.
Yeah, and for us, I think we had to adjust our expectations. So, we have this expectation that instructors were going to create their lists and we're just going to do the back end, what needs to be done at the library, where I think the reality is we're going to have to continue to create lists for some instructors and kind of slowly transition, potentially slower than we had planned or anticipated, to this more instructor mediated model. But overall, I would say the one thing that has really improved is the student experience. It's a much friendlier user interface, and we're able to respond to things such as broken links a lot faster than we were before.
Exactly. At our institution as well, we've done 572 acquisitions that were entirely triggered from our knowledge of what's on reading lists, which meant that we were able to do things like purchase unlimited ebooks for what would have otherwise been required text for students. So we're saving students money. And we're also able to, in one situation, we had a provincial report website that went down, and we were able to actually quickly find alternative copies of the report within a day of that having been noticed. So it's been really great from a student experience side, and it's just a matter of smoothing out the back end, but like it is with most things.
Okay, thank you so much, Madeline and Dwayne. And we still have some time now for questions, so please feel free to raise your hand and ask a question or drop a question in the chat. Go ahead, Dan. Oh, you're on mute, Dan.
So from the implementation side of things, just for institutions that may be looking at Leganto, were there any major challenges, things to watch out for, things like that?
That's a good question. I would say major challenges is it takes a bit longer to iron out the integration, I think, with the learning management system than you would expect. Like many sales pitches, everything seems like it's quick and easy, but it does take a bit longer. And it took us a while as well to sort of make sure that things were working the way we thought they would. Like I would have loved to have done a bit more testing. I don't recommend doing it in a month and a half before your first course goes live. Luckily, we were working directly with those instructors, and they were very gracious, and everyone in 2020 was used to going with the flow. But I think there was those moments of oh, well, that didn't work the way it should have worked on paper, and you're figuring it out in the back end.
Yeah, I would agree. So like Alma, which we're all aware, there's so many different configurations you can choose. And it's kind of hard switching to this new system, especially since we didn't have a system before, to think about what is the workflow and how can we configure this in a way that works for us. So Ex Libris, we collaborate on Basecamp. There's a checklist of things to configure, but it really is through practice that you understand what is working and what's not. And I know for us, it's still a really big learning curve, especially, we're not utilizing all the features that are potentially available. Like there's a library discussion tool where you can chat with the instructors about the reading list actually through Alma and through Leganto. So I think there's still a lot of work to do. Implementation, there's a time for it, but it also continues on as you learn what works and what doesn't.
Thank you.
So I'm going to wrap things up there. There are a few more questions in the chat, but we are at time for the next presentation. I did really want to thank Madeline and Dwayne, and perhaps the others can follow up. Their email addresses are on the screen right now to follow up with those questions about copyright and limiting access to PDFs. Very exciting questions. But thank you so much. A very thoughtful presentation. And I'll pass it over now to the next moderator, which I believe is our friend Randy.
Hi, everybody. It's your friend Randy. So I'm not going to take much time. I just want to introduce Jeff Sinclair, whose friendly face you've already seen today as well. He is giving the presentation on APIs in 15 minutes. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Randy. Hopefully you can all see my screen now. Excellent. So this will be a two-part presentation. The first part is just going to be an introduction to APIs, and then I'm going to go through some Alma API examples. But first I wanted to talk about, why do I want to talk about these topics with an audience which is not necessarily a technical audience? So the first reason is that it's a purely selfish one. In my work as a discovery and systems librarian, my work is different from most of my colleagues, which can lead to a feeling of isolation. So to reduce my isolation, I work to make connections with my colleagues and help them understand what I feel my role is within the organization and within the consortium, just as I like to learn more about their roles. And to understand my role, it helps to have some fundamental knowledge of what it is I'm doing. Another purely selfish reason is that when discussing technical issues and possibilities with non-technical staff, I find it strengthens my own understanding of these issues and possibilities, just as teaching a topic makes me a better student of it. I also like to write my technical documentation after having these sorts of discussions, because it clarifies things, and even if it's not going to be a non-technical audience using the documentation later on, it does make it more clear for future use. A third reason is that I'm, as a discovery and systems librarian, I find myself tempted to slip into a more reactive role at times. And I liken this temptation to a storyline in the science fiction novel series Red Dwarf, where characters enter an addicting virtual reality game called Better Than Life. And this game creates individually tailored worlds based on the psyche of each of the characters. And this is appropriate to the season. One of the characters finds himself in Bedford Falls, the fictional setting for the Christmas movie It's a Wonderful Life. And he's forever giving wings to angels and weeping over Zuzu's petals. And the character's addiction is sentimentality. However, there's a sinister side to the game. It's designed to be so irresistibly addicting that the characters playing the game are in danger of starving to death. So one of the characters, an android named Crichton, there's a picture from the BBC adaptation of, of the series, discovers that his friends are trapped in the game and he sets about to rescue them. And to save them, he must enter the game himself. And once in the game, he formulates a rescue plan and is about to enact it when he passes by a kitchen and sees a sink of dirty dishes. And so he decides to wash them. But the pile of dirty dishes never seems to get any smaller. The game has trapped Crichton by discovering his addiction, which I would say is the temptation of solving easy and obvious problems. So when I find myself slipping into a more reactive role, I like to ask myself, what am I doing right now? Am I providing vital assistance to my colleagues, or am I just washing an endless pile of dishes? Or at the very least, am I designing and building a dishwasher? Also, it helps when my colleagues know what kinds of vital assistance I can provide and what sorts of dishwashers I can design and build. When we're working with library data, we can see different views of the same object. For example, when we look at a list of search results, we can see several objects, and one of these might be of interest to us. Perhaps we're interested in the novel A Frolic of His Own, and we focus our attention on its details, just as in the real world, we may see a group of buildings and focus on one of these and observe its details. And this, of course, is the Chrysler Building in Manhattan. Once we select the object that's of most interest, it comes into closer focus. Yet it still appears within an environment with other objects. In the case of the search results, we see the services and navigation associated with this object. Catalogers working with library data see an even more focused and more isolated view of data. So when we're only looking at one record, it's sort of like seeing a building outside the context of its environment. There are representations of these same objects in other systems apart from library systems. In this case, Google Books provides a slightly different view of the same object we were just looking at in the library system. This view gives us some new information. Let's pretend for now that this is a useful summary, or at least set aside the discussion of its usefulness. To extend my book building analogy, this new view of the Chrysler Building reveals a body of water that wasn't previously visible in the other views. I think that's the East River. I'm not sure. Maybe people can correct me later in the chat. The data in Google Books is also available through a standards-based API. Now here's a title search that I performed in Google Books. Here's the same search using the Google Search API. Now at first glance, they may not look much alike, but they are. However, instead of returning a nicely formatted web page, what the API server is returning is a structured data object. And in this case, it's encoded in a notation format called JSON. So if you look at the URL, and it's probably maybe a bit too small, but basically the query, A Frolic of His Own, is embedded in both of the URLs. And you can see the summary from the formatted web page is also found within the structured data object. But what about this ID in the structured data object? You don't see it anywhere in the formatted web page. Well, actually, if you were to mouse over that Frolic of His Own, you would see embedded in there the ID, which is basically a unique identifier, which is used to track the object. So the relationship of these two representations of this object is somewhat like the relationship of a building to its plans. And like builders, systems librarians need these plans to build new objects and to modify existing ones. So as at Google Books, API, it's also available. There's also an API available for ALMA. And in this case, the object is not represented in JSON, but in XML. So here's a cataloger's view of that same object and how that snippet might look in an XML or the object as it's returned through the API. Here's a small snippet of the bibliographic record. We see a 300 field and a 650. And here's that snippet as it's modeled within the API. And you can see again that you've got a 300 tag and a 650 tag. And you can see the subfields and the data that are contained within those. Having access to the plans makes it possible for me to create, delete, or modify objects in the library system using standards-based protocols. So basically, we're just making a web request, submitting an XML document, and making a change. So in this case, I could actually insert that summary from the Google Books API into the catalog record using the ALMA API. And you can see how it would look in the staff interface and ultimately in Primo or in Omni. So when should you use APIs? If you have a lot of changes to make, APIs are useful. If you wanted just to insert one summary into one record, you obviously wouldn't do that through API. You would just do it directly within the record. The other thing is these changes should not require intervention. If you have to intervene with every change that you're making, it might be simpler just to proceed manually. Another factor would be there isn't a simpler tool. So in the ALMA environment, you might be able to make these sorts of changes you want using sets and jobs or import profiles or with a normalization process. If we wanted to make the same change to a large number of bibliographic records, you would probably use a normalization process. However, if you wanted to make individual changes to a large number of bibliographic records, such as adding new summaries to each of those records, APIs might be a good option. And there's 9 different APIs for ALMA, and I think 7 for Primo. I'm going to give you a couple examples. I said I was going to give you one from Primo today. I'm sorry I'm not, because I'm running out of time. But I'm going to give you an example from bibliographic records and inventory API and the configuration and administration APIs. So the first example is a script I wrote to make items for microfilms. So here was the crisis. We had very few item records within the microfilm. Most were not barcoded. So basically we didn't really know how many reels we had. The serial holdings records, such as they were from Symphony, were not really usable. And the third part of the crisis was that the microfilm were moving to a controlled access space. So if we wanted to access these, we needed to be able to request them at the item level. So they basically needed to barcode and create item records for each of these. The opportunity was that we did have bibliographic records for almost everything, microfilm-wise. And I had a student worker available for the summer. So the student didn't work directly within ALMA. The student worked in a SharePoint Excel document and would basically just take a master record like the New York Times, and using the Excel, you can create a number sequence. So did that. And then all they had to do was to enter the barcode and transcribe from the box the description for the date or the real number. Using that, we could create a record using the API. So that's the barcode and the description, and you might see there it added a box number, and that was something I had to do. It was kind of tricky because it didn't, the way access worked, it ended with a 24, not a 2400. So I had to make sure that I had the 2400 so it would file correctly. And then you can see how these descriptions would look within the staff view, and you can see that the boxes are sorted numerically by the box number, and so therefore the dates are sorted correctly, even if they aren't formed uniformly. And then within Primo or Omni, you can see the box number, and you could make a request if you knew you needed August 2nd from 1915. Well, that's box 39, and you can request that. Second example, I wanted to be able to track items that were withdrawn, or at least know something about the items that we have been withdrawing. So I wanted to have notes that we could track. I used the internal note 3, and to be able to track the weeding date, so we could enumerate what was weeded within a certain time frame. So the problem with this is that you can't actually set weeding dates within the Alma staff interface, number one. And the other thing is, if you create a note about something you're deleting and delete it, well, that data isn't indexed in analytics, so you lose that data. Now, the opportunity is that through an API, we can set the weeding date and withdraw items once the appropriate notes have been indexed. And the notes also can be applied by a job. So say we had a whole bunch of items that we decided were copy weeding, we could just apply that with a batch, scan in a bunch of barcodes and run a job to apply that note to those to that set of items. So the way it works is that the staff user would add a withdraw note either individually or through batch. And then at 6:30, the API kicks off a job to set the weeding date. Around 7 p.m., Alma Analytics indexing process starts. And then the next day at 6:30, the API looks at through analytics to see, what's been indexed with a weeding date and an appropriate note. And then it uses a job to withdraw them. So the information is retained in analytics. Are there any questions?
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. There is one question that came in during the presentation. It's from Larissa. Can the API be used to change Alma holding records? And I pasted in a link to the documentation, but over to you.
Yeah, actually, absolutely. I've used the API to change a bunch of holdings information for government documents, because we had all of our government documents were one big location in Alma. But through characteristics of the call number, I could split it up into, I think there were 5 discrete locations. And when you're making change, the other thing was, there were problems with the type of call number. So it wasn't, it was claiming to be LC, but it was actually CODOC. And when you try, when you normalize CODOC using LC, it doesn't file correctly. I might have been able to use a normalization process for that now in retrospect. I'm trying to remember now, but you certainly can manipulate holdings records with the API.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other questions? You can toss your hand up in the air, or you can type them into chat. I also liked the metaphor of the never-ending pile of dishes, because I just feel like that's a metaphor for life. The dishes are never done.
It's true. They do need to be done, though.
It's true. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. And we have a 2.5-minute break.
Or maybe
and
I'll
we have
just
a
chime
comment
in.
from
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say we have a comment from Dan Scott. I can confirm that you can use a normalization process to fix the call number classification type in bulk, but I was prepared to use the API. So both could work.
Yep.
And yes, Monica, sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's okay.
Did you still have you have a question? Oh, and Colleen says they're going to show a Primo API later. And Robin Berger says she likes your curtains.
Yeah, the curtains are from the previous owner. I can't claim responsibility for select. I do love. They're nice, you know.
Okay, thanks so much, Jeff.
So Jeff, I think that you are the next moderator.
Yes. So I will introduce the next session, something near and dear to my heart. It is working with usage data in Alma Analytics. And the presenter is Roger Reka from Windsor. Roger, take it away.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to see everyone here. And yes, this is also something that is, I guess, near and dear to my heart, which is working with usage data in Alma Analytics. It's something I've been kind of trying to establish and get going here at Windsor for a bit. I will say there's a lot of advantages to harvesting and incorporating usage data into our Alma ILS, but it's also not necessarily also the most clear and straightforward approach to working with usage data. So what I'll do in this short 15-minute presentation is give you kind of an overview of the lessons that I've learned so far in working with usage data in Alma Analytics, and just kind of give some learnings, highlight some of the frustrations, and also just kind of give you a sense of what is possible and where we can go with this. So I'll just start sharing my screen. Slides will be available afterwards. All right. So this is kind of what usage data looks like in Alma. So in an earlier presentation to the Collaborative Futures group, I did kind of go over the workflow of harvesting usage data. So how do we actually set up usage data, or sorry, sushi accounts in Alma, and how does it all get incorporated into the system? That's kind of highlighted at the top over here. We have over the sushi protocol, we query the platform's API, we grab the usage data in Alma, and then the Alma database pretty much makes a copy of all of the material as read-only, and that sort of gets shifted over into the Alma Analytics database. And Alma Analytics is a version of Oracle Cloud, which allows us to kind of play with all of the data that's available in Alma. Now, an important thing to kind of note right off the hop is that the data will be sent, I guess, into two different areas. So there is a subject area called usage data, and then there is a subject area called e-inventory. And specifically within the inventory area, we're looking at the cost usage table. So it works really well, I will say, to actually harvest the usage data, brings it into Alma Analytics. And then once you're in Alma Analytics, you have to kind of work with the usage data in two separate subject areas. And we will get into that in just a moment. Before we get into that, I wanted to kind of go over what our goals here at Windsor are with working with usage data in Alma Analytics. So the first thing is that we want to be able to view, select, and download counter usage data that's collected automatically through Sushi, kind of in the same way that we're downloading usage data reports right now from platform websites. So that's what we want to, one goal. The second goal is we wanted to be able to quickly scan all of our subscriptions to kind of see what needs to be evaluated further, right? So can we do some basic cost usage metrics on all of our subscriptions, and then just have them be flagged as any time they dip below a certain ratio. And then the next thing is we wanted to also generate statistics quickly for reporting in a lot of different contexts, but also specifically with the CARL reporting statistics program, which was quite tedious to do in the past. we have to date, I think, accomplished number 1 and number 3. So we can view, select, download, and usage data that was collected via Sushi. And we can also generate the statistics for quickly reporting. But we're still working, and I really should say I'm still working on trying to be able to develop an appropriate dashboard report that will allow us to reliably scan all of our subscriptions to identify, again, what needs to be evaluated further. And we'll get into that in just a bit later. So one of the first learnings, I guess, that came out of this process when I was reflecting was that it's really, really important and very useful to determine what your use cases are before you start developing or writing your dashboards and reports. So that looks like speaking to all of our relevant stakeholders, thinking pretty broadly, who at the library really needs to use usage data and how do they use it. Some of the use cases that are relevant for Windsor are, for example, an electronic resources librarian, such as myself, needs to analyze a package of resources for renewal decisions in quite a lot of detail, right? And the outcomes, or sort of the questions I need to sort of answer are we canceling this? Are we perhaps debundling this? And are we renewing as is? And if we could do that in Alma Analytics, that would be great. The next thing is that library staff need to be able to collect basic usage for reports. So in our workflow, and the workflow we're trying to strengthen here at Windsor, is that our library staff are the ones who are proactively collecting usage data, seeing what is, what is very low use, what's high use, and then passing that down the workflow. So they need to be able to collect usage data in sort of the raw form. And then a liaison librarian may be curious about how a resource in their particular subject area is being used relative to other resources in their subject, or perhaps relative to all electronic resources. So we have kind of 3 different use cases, and based off these use cases, you'll have different approaches to writing and developing reports. And in fact, actually, these would be 3 separate reports or dashboards that will come out of this. My next learning was you have to really select your subject area wisely. So when you go to actually write a report or dashboard in Alma Analytics, you'll notice that the first thing that you're prompted to do is to select a subject area. So there are a number of subject areas, I think more than 12. Actually, there might be more than 12. I've never really counted. And what subject areas are collections of attributes and measures, pretty much the fields, right, that exist in Analytics that are organized into different folders. And all of these subject areas are relevant or related to each other in some way. So you need to be able to select which one you would like to build your reports and dashboards. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, and something I've learned over the last couple of months is that usage data, the counter usage data that you're either collecting through Sushi or you're manually uploading into Alma, is going to be separated into 2 separate subject areas or 2 separate folders in Alma Analytics. So the first one we have is named very nicely is the usage data subject area. And this is where raw counter data gets stored. And you can kind of think about this subject area being completely separated from all of the other data that you have in Alma. So this is in no way connected to your collections or your portfolios or to any pricing or POLs. This is just the raw counter data that would come from the counter reports as if you were downloading from the websites. So when you're trying to think, if your questions relate really just to usage data only, in the same way that you would get usage data from a platform report, or sorry, from a report on a platform, this is where you'd go, okay? So if you don't want to get any other extra information about subject classifications, if you don't get any information about pricing or portfolios in Alma, this is the way to go. This is just the raw counter data that comes straight from the usage data reports. This is really helpful if you want to try to recreate those counter reports in some sort of dashboard or report. So in a sense, you're trying to just bypass the work of finding the password in the user account, going to the admin portal, downloading the reports. That's where you'd go to create those types of reports. And then the other thing to note too is that this subject area is updated weekly. So you are going to, be downloading Sushi data at whatever interval you're setting in your configuration. But then Alma Analytics updates its database on a weekly basis. Now, there's another area, subject area. It's called the e-inventory subject area, which is this big mega subject area. It contains information on purchase order lines, on collections, on portfolios, and then it has a folder within it called cost usage. And what these are not the raw usage data. That's kind of the distinction here. These are pre-calculated measures and fields that Elma has decided in their own way to present us with cost usage metrics. So for example, there is a usage measure in there, and that is based off of whatever Elma thought was most appropriate to pull the usage from. For example, like the TRJ1, unique item requests might be in that. And you have to really consult the documentation to see what data is populating this particular measure for all these different resources. It also calculates a cost per use metric on its own, which is kind of interesting. But what I will say that in my own personal experience is that it is kind of glitchy, and we will delve into that in just a bit, as much as time will allow. And it's also only updated once per month because these are, again, pre-calculated measures. It's not really the raw data that's coming out. So Elma Analytics only populates or updates this information once per month as it goes through to recalculate all these measures and fields. So again, 2 different subject areas, and based on what you're trying to accomplish, you have to know which one to go to. The next thing is that when you are using the usage data subject area, it's really important and helpful to use filters to actually make sense of the reports that are made. So for example, when you're creating a report in the usage data subject area, if a title has any recorded counter metrics, it will show up when you generate any report. So for example, let's say, a book we have in our collection or an electronic book that we have in our collection might have some turnaway statistics, and it might not have any other usage in unique item requests, unique title requests, or unique investigations, whatever it is. Let's say it's only the turnaways. If you're still generating a report that has titles and you're including your unique item request field, that book will show up. It'll show up because it has existed as a title somewhere and has some usage in some sort of, or has some counter metric included. So what you have to do is you have to be very careful to use the material type indicator, which is another field that will help you to narrow down the usage to what you're really looking for. So in this screenshot here, you'll see that I've created a report. And in this report, I'm really only curious to get the title unique item requests field. And what I've done here was just say, show me any fields, or sorry, any row, any title that does not have any usage in these other areas. Or I could do the inverse, which is just to say, give me any title that has usage in this particular field. So the material type indicator really is your friend when you're working with usage data, with the usage data subject area. The next learning, or the next thing that I've really found was really helpful and was not really helpful at the beginning when I didn't know it, was that it's really helpful and important to download all the available reports that you have for a platform. So here's a screenshot, for example, for JSTOR. And for JSTOR, we have selected 10 usage data reports, which are, I believe, all the 10 or all reports that are available through JSTOR via Sushi. And the reason why you want to download all of the reports is that when you're working with usage data and Elma Analytics down the road, especially in the usage data subject area, you're going to be pulling data in from specific fields and measures. So for example, what we'll see down here is that the unique item request metric for a title can appear in the TR reports, it can appear in the TRJ1 reports, and it can appear in the PR report, the platform report. But when you're generating dashboards and reports and analytics, you're going to be pulling in data from just from specific fields from specific reports. So what is probably the best approach in my perspective is just make sure that you download all of the reports to begin with. In that way, you have all of the data available if you need to, for example, if you find down the road that perhaps the TRJ1 unique item request metric doesn't have any data, but the TR one does. Let's say maybe because the TRJ1 report was not available, but the TR report was, and perhaps the inverse can be made as well. So it's really important just to make sure that you download all available counter reports for any platform. The next learning, this kind of came out of some feedback I got from staff after I've developed our initial dashboard, is to make sure that you try to organize your dashboards like a normal counter report. For example, we have the usage data export dashboard in Elma Analytics, which exists just to be able to download, to view, select, and download raw usage data. And initially, I grouped a lot of the metrics in one tab. So I included the item report usage or unique item requests. I included item requests from databases, and I included item requests from titles all in one tab. And it wasn't very clear to people who were working with the usage data down the road what the difference between all of these different metrics and fields were in the report. But if you can kind of take your cue from how counter reports are organized to begin with, you can kind of keep the same schema, and it helps to alleviate any confusion down the road. So in the second version of this dashboard, what I've done is I've actually separated out the metrics into the same names for the parent, I guess, reports where the data actually came from. So I'll only include the title report, sorry, the title related metrics in the title report, and then so on with platform, database, and item. And that just helps to clear the confusion, because there are a lot of fields that you can populate in Alma Analytics with usage data. And if you can just keep the same schema, or at least the same general organization, if somebody has some knowledge of how counter reports are already created to begin with, then they can rely on that down the road. Another thing that I've identified, and this is kind of my biggest frustration with the e-inventory area, subject area, is that you can actually have usage with decimal points, which of course does not make sense. When I looked at the documentation, I couldn't really find anything, but there are some blog posts on the Ex Libris developer site, where one of the Ex Libris folks said that there are cases where usage data may appear with decimal values. This depends on how the report is made and reflects a proportion of the usage based on price. So when you have titles with multiple portfolios, the usage can be proportionally split, just like this. And that is not very helpful for us, because of course you cannot have 1.64 usage, whatever the usage means in this context, of a journal title. So it's important to figure out why this is happening. And the reason why this happens is because you're using the portfolio identifier for any given title. Which again is a little confusing to me. That's the explanation that was given to me when I tried to query this. But this is something I'm still trying to work through, and that's why we haven't accomplished goal number 2. But just be aware that if you are using the e-inventory subject area, if you have any titles that have multiple portfolios, you can have usage with decimal points, which will again be not correct, and also will just limit the reliability or confidence you have in the data. Another learning, and I know I'm kind of running out of time here. Everything is case sensitive, okay? So if you're creating a dashboard or report, just be aware everything is case sensitive. And you have 2 options around this. So one, you can select to use a normalized field. So instead of the display title, they will have a normalized title, which will make everything lowercase. And the same with ISSN and platforms. And then just remember to type in lowercase. But of course, this is not easy to always remember, and it's not really the best user experience to try to type in everything lowercase and without any colons and so on. So instead, what I suggest to do is to edit your prompts in the corresponding fields to change the input to upper or lowercase. So that is sort of a solution out of that. And then I am just at the end here. The last learning is, of course, publish, share, and adapt. So publish your reports as objects or analytics objects so that other people in the library can access them. And then seek feedback, proactively seek feedback from the end users and revise, because it's not going to be complete just on its own. And then you can also share your reports with the OCUL community, which is something I'm hoping to do. And then if you do run into issues, just know that there is a lot of help online. So if you just consult the Oracle Analytics Cloud documentation, which I've linked down here, you can find a lot of answers to your questions around writing and developing reports. You can also just Google your question and just add on at the end Oracle Analytics, and typically somebody's already asked the same issue, and you can find support online. And Ex Libris is pretty quick in responding to these things. There are lots of canned and shared reports online in the Alma communities, I should say, and then also talk to other people who are doing this work, because I'd love to also hear from you and work together on trying to accomplish some of the things I'm running into as well. And yeah, sorry, that's the end of my 17-minute presentation. I will be able to answer questions for 2 minutes.
Thanks, Roger. I don't see any questions in the chat. Might have time for a couple of questions. Anyone has one? There's also the possibility to ask stuff offline and encourage people to do that. And as we are heading into a break, since I don't see any questions, maybe we should just call the break now. What do you think, Anika?
Yeah, I think that we can also take questions at the end of the session as well. But yeah, if anyone's got any questions, we can hang around for a few minutes. But otherwise, we will. I think there might have been a question just come in.
I think they're just kudos so far.
And I would really encourage again, I'm trying to get into the habit more of sharing, I guess, my problems when I encounter them. I think with the Collaborative Futures EAN listserv, just to kind of share those issues. Because yeah, I would say I think it's really great that we have all the data here. It is kind of messy working with it in my experience, but once you establish a bit of understanding and experience working with analytics, it does get easier. But definitely a steep learning curve and a lot of rabbit holes when you're first developing.
And just a question: would CFSA Systems Analytics be another good group to share with? Yeah, I think so.
Not personally part of that group, but that is a good idea. Maybe for me as well, just to share with them. So yeah.
Perhaps a future member, Roger.
Yes. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Right. Thank you. I guess call the break for now.
Yeah. Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Jeff. And thanks for our presenters from the first set of sessions. We will take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 11 and hear from Brooke first off. Thanks, everyone. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our OCUL Collaborative Futures mini conference. Thank you again to all who presented in our first half of the morning. Just a couple of things before we jump in. Colleen has added a link to our feedback survey in the chat there for those of you who would like to give us some feedback on the session and any possible topics that you would like expanded on in maybe a Monday drop-in session, or any other topics that you would like us to cover in other ways as well. So please feel free to give us some feedback there. We'd really appreciate it. I will hand back over to Monica now for our next session.
Hello again. So just ever so briefly, I'm lucky to be able to be the moderator for my brilliant colleagues, Evelyn, Colleen, and Dan. And they'll be taking it away with a Brock showcase. So I'll hand it right over to them.
Thank you, Monica. Colleen, can I confirm with you that you will be posting the slide? Great, thank you. So a land acknowledgement. Brock University acknowledges the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. On the agenda today, I'll be explaining our process for creating featured collections in Omni. Colleen will present on improving discovery to our archives and special collections, and Dan will lead us through the twists and turns of creating new book lists. Next slide. Hi, my name is Evelyn Smith. I am in Access Services at Brock and am responsible for promotion and outreach. Next slide. The James A. Gibson Library at Brock is comprised of a large main floor and 6 upper floors in the Schmann Tower. We have always had a prominent book display on our main floor, and we transitioned from a strictly new book display to thematic ones about 5 years ago. The displays are well received. There's casual browsing, and we also promote each new collection on our social media channels. In a crisis, there is opportunity, and that was true of the early days of lockdown. Our spaces were inaccessible, and we had a very real need to somehow maintain connection with our users virtually. The solution was in our new feature-rich ILS. Monica, our manager, recommended to my colleague Charity and I that we investigate the collections feature. And with the help of John Dingle in our collections department at Brock, we set to work. Next slide. The Ex Libris documentation for creating collections is available on their website under Managing Collections and also in Configuring Discovery. I do have all this documented in a step-by-step guide as well, which I can share. In terms of workflow, you're going to establish your theme. In some cases, we've created collections around specific events, like a professional development conference for graduate students, or to coincide with other themes like Indigenous History Month. You are going to search Omni in your own library as a search scope for the titles. We aimed for titles published within the last 2 to 3 years and mostly available electronically. And this is important to note because previously we had no mechanism for regularly promoting our new ebooks, and they make up almost 50% of our collection. We did include some print titles, and this was fine even during lockdown as we had curbside pickup. You're going to pin the books that you find and email them to yourself. Then you'll head into Alma one by one to add them one by one. Next slide. So we won't be showing this demo due to time constraints, but it is freely available on our YouTube if you want to look at it later. Next slide. So promotion. So to promote the collections, I create Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram posts, graphics and blurbs for each collection, and post them several times a week or several times over a 6 to 8 week period that the collection is in promotion. Recent work by Colleen, who is also our website lead, was the addition of a featured collections blog on our homepage using the news blog format in WordPress. We do post print displays on this blog post area too. As the collections are saved in Omni, we can refeature them with new titles whenever we need to support annual events. I created a bit.ly for the Omni Collections landing page, and as of December 1st, it had been clicked on 142 times. That's for the entire collections lobby. And our university-wide weekly update to all staff and faculty also featured a story about our collections. Next slide. To date, we have over 20 Omni thematic collections. The collections lobby has been visited over 1,300 times, and over 700 clicks have been made on individual collections. We have prepared a written step-by-step guide, and we've been consulted by several OCUL colleagues on the mechanics of the process. Next slide. One thing on my wish list for improvements is the ability to add book cover images to themes or to items in Omni that don't have a cover image. Next slide. Thank you. Colleen, over to you.
So hi, everyone. I am a liaison librarian as well as the user experience librarian here at Brock. And in this role, I also chair our Primo working group, where projects and issues like the ones we're presenting here today get initiated and problems get solved, hopefully most of the time. And one of those projects that we had this past year was how to improve the discovery of our archives and special collections content that's found in Omni. Oops. So why did we want to focus on this content? Specifically was because it's just really hard to find this content in all of the content that Omni is indexing. And so we don't have a designated filter to limit to just this collection. The only way to sort of do this, to filter for users to filter to this content, is for them to use the Brock locations filter, which is the 7th filter down on the left side menu. And then within that, scroll to wherever archives and special collections shows up, if it does at all. So this just generally wasn't that great. So our first strategy that we did was back in February, when we decided to create a separate search scope specifically for the archives content, which appears as a radio button across the top in the advanced search and from a drop-down menu in the basic search display. The new search scope allows users to immediately limit their results to only content from the archives and special collections. And it also has the added benefit of allowing us to add a direct link. And we used like a button on the archives homepage for users to navigate directly to Omni from that point. The next thing we did was back in August, when we enabled the Brock plus Omni library search scope. And we needed to update our search box on our library homepage as well with this new search scope. So now we had 3 different search scopes, and we felt at this time it was worth updating our WordPress shortcode to include parameters for each of our scopes. And this would allow us to create a custom search boxes for each of them that could be added to different parts of our website. Specifically, we wanted to do this for the archives homepage. So here's a screenshot of our archives homepage where we upgraded from a button. So previously we had like a red button that users could direct to the Omni interface, whereas now the search box allow users to directly add a search specifically to it. And we also added the subtitle in the Omni box for archives and special collections. And this allowed users to, it also signaled to our users that our archives content is searchable and that it's not just a place in the library to visit. And the third strategy we did very recently in November, and we enabled the 500 and 515 notes field in our MARC records. These notes frequently include important information and details related to the archival records and special collections funds. So you can hear, this is how it appears in a Omni record. And so far, the feedback from our archives and collections staff has been really positive, and they feel these changes will help with discovery and for when they're teaching or working with researchers looking for archive content. And that's it, quick and easy. So I'll pass it on over to Dan now.
Thank you, Colleen. My name is Dan, and I am the Library Systems Analyst at Brock University. I'm responsible for the support, configuration, and administration of the Omni application at Brock. Another area of improvement within Omni that we identified was to create a way to intuitively highlight new titles added to our collections. Omni's new results facet does give users a way to filter these items, but we wanted to feature these items in a more prominent way and ideally extend it outside of Omni as well. I'm glad to follow Roger and Jeff's presentations as we relied heavily on both analytic data and the API functionality for this project. So why do we want this? Our library invests significant time, energy, and resources into the acquisition of new materials, but users must use multiple search facets to find these items. We also have received numerous inquiries from faculty and students for information on what is new at the library. Additionally, the required data is accessible via analytics reports. It's possible to use the analytics report to compile a list of new materials and export this with the API. I did some research into how this problem was being approached by other institutions and if there was anything out there that could help us solve the issue. There appear to be a number of libraries that have built this into Primo, and 2 such institutions, ETSU and the Getty Research Institute, were clearly notable. The Getty makes new books accessible via search profile, giving users the ability to select a new book's profile slot and then conduct a search within these items, just like you would search anything else. Next slide, please. ETSU is a good example of broader possibilities. Using the data retrieved, they built widgets, giving users a visual way to browse items and thus bringing the typical new books shelf to life virtually. This is something we're looking at for our next steps. Next, please. We decided to begin with an approach similar to the one used by Getty because this was a direct enhancement to Omni and leverages its search capabilities to make these items even more accessible. Using analytics data to pull items for the list provided to be very straightforward, as was processing the data, which I did within an adaptation of the shell scripts used by Getty. Importing the list back into Primo, however, proved to be a different story altogether. In the end, I was unable to configure the profile in a way that correctly merged the imported records with our existing inventory, which rendered the approach unusable. Next slide. I outlined my process and the challenge I faced in an inquiry to the CF Expert Advisory Network, in case anyone with more experience using import profiles could offer ideas. While not making any headway with my record merging difficulties, I got a suggestion for a new workflow from Brandon Ullman, which I'm grateful for. He mentioned using API calls to dynamically manage a collection, an endeavor I had not thought previously possible, and to limit our search scope to these items. Using this workflow, I could continue to use analytic report data to compile the list of new items because analytic filters give an incredible level of control and would let us make adjustments to the criteria for new items without changing any code. This made the challenge I faced with merging records completely irrelevant and furthermore eliminated the need to manage any record externally, which would have been done by maintaining them in an FTP location. Next slide.
2 minutes remaining.
Next slide, sorry, Colleen. Sorry, so this approach was successful. Our new books list works as expected and will be rolled out to users soon. Next. So going forward, I wanted to streamline the process just to help alleviate some issues that arose with limitations on the volume of changes made by the API calls. I also intend to upload this code to GitHub and post it on Spot Docs along with documentation for how to implement it. The process for doing so isn't difficult, but it will be documented as fully as I can make it, just to make it as straightforward as possible. And then finally, I want to create book slider widgets similar to what ETSU has available, which is going to be our next phase of development. So these elements can be added on the main library website and even on digital display signage. Next. This brings me to the end of my part of the presentation. Thank you for your time and attention. Back to you, Colleen.
So that's it. Thank you. Sorry about my slide mishaps there.
Thanks so much, Dan, Colleen, and Evelyn. And I got to get permission to add a couple minutes onto your time there, just because we do have some buffer time at the end as well. So we already have some questions in the chat, so I'll read the first one in the chat from Ed. Is all of Brock's archival content visible in Omni?
That's a good question. I am not the archives person per se, but I believe most of it is, like, even if there's records for where you would find it elsewhere, whether it's in other collection user interfaces like Omeka or Collections Builder.
Another archival one where I'm going to struggle to pronounce correctly. Does Brock use an archival system like Minisys?
No, like you, I've never heard that term, Monica, so I don't believe we're using that. But like I said, the archives folks are using like other UIs to present collections and things, so that they may be using, I don't think they're using Minisys, but they are using other things to showcase their content.
I think this one's over to you, Colleen, about the search scope. What's your data like, from Krista? What is your data like for the number of folks changing their search scope?
Like the analytics? That's a good question. Not sure if I have the answer to that one, unless if, I think we're still looking into how to get the most out of our analytics. Perhaps Dan might be able to tell us if we can find that information.
Yeah, so usage data for whether people actually even change the search scope should be available, and I can look into that. And I'm glad you brought that up. The other thing too is it's possible to link directly to a search scope. So if you do a search in Omni, it changes the link, and then as well you can even put your own terms in there. So what we intend to do is add a link to our website that will link users directly to the scope with a wildcard actually in the link, so it'll just bring up all of the items that are in the scope. But actually, yeah, it's an interesting question, and I appreciate sort of bringing it up.
Yeah, and I'll just add too that that's one of the reasons why like we're not really sure how users really just change from one search scope to a next within Omni. So that's why having the search box on the Omni page really allows people to like sidestep that choice. Because they probably maybe aren't really changing the search scope on their own. And so if they're already at the archives page, if there's researchers that know that they're looking for this content, they can start searching immediately from the archives homepage.
I think it would be super interesting. I don't know if it is possible to find out if we can collect data on changing the search scope. If we can, I think everyone would be interested to know how to do that. Any other last questions before we wrap it up? Okay, I'm going to thank our presenters one more time. Thank you, Dan, Colleen, and Evelyn, and I will now pass it over to the next presentation.
Hi, everybody, it's me again. Please join me in welcoming Sam Gibbon and Danielle Farr from the University of Waterloo, and they're going to be talking to us about resource sharing, ILL borrowing in Alma. So over to you, Sam and Danielle.
Thanks, Randy. Danielle and I are happy to be here. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Hey, Sam, I'm showing your slides are a bit cut off.
Okay. Danielle's working on
Slide
it.
master.
She's slide master. So
okay.
Let's see.
There we go. Perfect.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. And I think, yeah. All right. Is it in presentation mode yet or?
Not yet.
Okay.
It was, and then it wasn't.
There
now
we go.
It is.
Excellent.
Yay.
Thanks, Danielle. Excellent. So I just want to acknowledge that we are presenting from the region of Waterloo, and it's the traditional territory of the Neutral and Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee peoples. So today we're going to talk a little bit about resource sharing, borrowing in Alma. So we're really talking about, go ahead, Danielle, next slide, please. The 2 years of Alma borrowing. And so a little bit about the agenda we're going to talk about today. So we're going to review the timeline. We're going to look at our solutions that we've used so far. We're going to talk about some statistics. We're going to talk about our current challenges, and then we're going to talk about our hope for the future. Next slide. Thanks, Danielle. So just a brief timeline. So December 2019, implementation of Alma and the activation of the TUG automatic fulfillment network. This matched our previous service model as best as possible prior to Alma implementation. And then in January 2020, we had the realization that we needed to implement Alma resource sharing borrowing to handle the amount of requesting. And when we get to the stats, you'll see why. So we had this increase, and we really thought it was down to requesting was easier than in Racer. And a lot of you have probably already seen this, where 2 clicks and the request is placed. Unfortunately, just because Guelph or Laurier had the item, it didn't mean that the request could be filled. And so it resulted in a lot of requests ending up in locate failed queue. And since Alma could not configure where to send these. So unfortunately, along with that, unfortunately, we still missed a piece of the configuration at this point. And so anything that went unfulfilled was being canceled by the system and disappearing. And you can imagine that was not a good result for us. So we discovered how to keep the rejected requests active, and then we added to the list of different queues we needed to keep on top of it. So then in February 2020, we added Omni partners as ISO resource sharing partners. March 2020, COVID closure and everything shut down. And then in May of 2020, we participated in the free trial of Rapid ILL, which was a lifesaver for our patrons for sure. March 2021, we officially became a Rapid partner. And then sometime in the spring semester, the Omni-wide automatic fulfillment network was launched, and requests were now automatically going to AFN partners, and the number of items passing through the ILL traditional office had significantly decreased as they were so easy, the AFN allowed items to be received and dealt with at the circ desk by scanning in the barcodes and going onto the hold shelf. So throughout this time, more partners have been added to our ROTAs. So University of Toronto, Ryerson Mac, some BCI partners as well. And the numbers of requests needed to be transcribed into another system has definitely significantly decreased. So here's some snapshots. So if we could go back one, Danielle, I think. A snapshot of Alma borrowing requests at U of W.
Sorry, I froze there for a second.
Oh, that's okay. So we just need to go back one, and yep, that's the one. Perfect. So we can see the number of requests in Alma since January 2020. And you can see right off the get-go in January 2020, request numbers exploded. And with us receiving nearly 800 loan requests from our patrons in 1 month. At this point, again, we only had Guelph and Laurier configured as AFN partners. So a huge percentage of these requests ended up in locate failed if Alma couldn't find an available copy in either of those two locations. This really lit a fire under us to try and get the rest of the group in as ISO ILL partners. This way we could push everything not filled at Guelph or Laurier through to those racer locations or the other Omni partners and keep the requests at least somewhat manageable. So you can see there's a lull in the summer of 2020 where we were in the first lockdown and physical item requesting was turned off. And then finally, you can see it slowly picking back up as COVID restrictions relaxed until finally a huge spike in September when we welcomed many of our students back to the campus for a semester of blended in-person and remote instruction. In the next slide, you can see this massive spike in August, and that was actually a systematic review done by one of our departments on campus. So, but the pandemic has absolutely influenced the increased demand for digital resources, but we suspect the increase also comes from the ability to submit a digital request directly in Omni. And previously patrons could only submit digital requests by logging into Racer, and for some it was easier just to order the full print book. So loan request data, kind of like 2018 versus 2021. The AFN has officially started in the late summer of 2021. Along the same time, U of W changed the default scope of our Omni catalog from U of W only to all Omni libraries. The increase of digitization requests and the decrease in loan requests does make sense given the pandemic restrictions still in place in 2021 and the fact that we had electronic access to 900,000 items via HathiTrust, which is something we still have on board right now. Another potential explanation is that in Voyager, which is the system we had previously, we allowed patrons to do recalls. And so there may have been like a little bit of turnover in loans that way. Pandemic aside, I think there's a general shift towards the preference for digital resources, we all know, as the turnaround does tend to be quicker and there isn't the geographical restrictions. So I'm going to turn it over to Danielle for the rest of the presentation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle, and I'm going to be going over a little bit of how we actually manage these requests that we're receiving. So I'll start with the digital request, and this is just kind of a bit of an infographic about who's filling the request that we receive. We have Rapid IOL set up to be the first partner added in the ROTA for all Alma digital requests. And as you can see, they do actually fill a significant portion of our requests, up to 60%. And this process is mostly automatic. The only mediation that staff are doing is we are checking the file that is sent to us for a little bit of quality control before passing the file on to the patient. Anything that's coming into Alma that can't be filled by Rapid IOL, staff are then kind of investigating it and seeing where else we can send the request. So our data shows that about 7% of requested items were actually found to be either open access or in our own electronic collections. In theory, these are things our patrons should have been able to access. However, there are some issues with the records that are showing up at Omni, which we will go over later. Another 4% have gone on to the ISO partners that we have from OCUL. This doesn't necessarily mean we are transcribing to 6% of requests from Alma into Racer, because our Racer form is still live. So we are, when patrons submit in Racer, we tend to leave it in Racer, which is a bit easier than moving things around. For our loan requests, you're seeing similar kind of results where quite a high proportion is automated in the ASN. This is like up to 84%. Staff don't really need to do too much work for it. The patron places the request, it goes on to all of the Omni partners and shows up at our library and suggests staff can scan it in. About 4% of the requests we are receiving in Alma are being filled by ISO partners. So usually T. Ryerson McMaster and a couple BCI partners. And then a remaining 12% are filled outside of Alma in either Racer or OCLC. Number is quite a lower for loan requests because we are trying to transition away from Racer. So when we see a loan request for something that's available in the ASN, we will move it into Alma just to get the patron that better loan date and to have more autonomy in renewals or managing their account. Now, in terms of some of the challenges that we are still facing, as I mentioned before, there are a couple of strange records that are discoverable and requestable within Omni. There has been a lot of record cleanup to fix our own material. There's still, particularly with electronic resources, sometimes there will be a record for both the journal and the article title, and one of them will link to our electronic resources, but the other one won't, that kind of thing. So still working through some of those requests. Another challenge that we are facing, another challenge that we are facing is we are finding that Alma be quite granular. There might be a couple different records for the same resource, but because they're cataloged slightly differently, Alma doesn't send the request to both partners. It will just send the request to the partners that were on the first record that the patron actually submitted the request on. So in those cases, sometimes it comes back as unfilled because that first partner, their copy was unavailable. Another challenge that we are facing is just general confusion between working in different systems. Our patrons aren't sure which system to check to look for the request, and staff have to manage linking requests in between both systems. So those are some of the challenges. And some of the things that we're hoping to implement or that we're currently working on to kind of streamline things further and help our patients further is to start the patron-mediated renewals. The renewal process can have a couple different models depending on how automated we want it to be and which steps we want automated. We have been able to get it to work from the staff side, so if a patron emails us, we can submit a renewal request to the lender. However, it's not renewable from the patron end, which we would like to implement to have some more autonomy for them. Another thing we would like to do is we'd like to add some more ISO partners. This would increase the reach that we have within ALMA before the request needs to be moved into another system. And along with adding more partners, we can add more locate profiles and automatic rotas to streamline that process further. And finally, we would love to be able to start using the blank ALMA ILL request forms. We are taking a couple steps before that to further streamline, as we suspect we might get flooded with a whole bunch more requests now that it becomes more visible, rather than patrons having to go into a whole separate system in order to request things where they can't find a record and on. And in addition to that, we're just constantly on the lookout for some fine tuning and figuring out what else we can do to kind of streamline this process. And that's about it for our presentation. We've learned a lot over the past 2 years as we continue to make improvements to serve our patrons better. We still have a lot of areas to improve, but we're very excited to see what the next 2 years will bring.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Danielle and Samantha. We're open for questions from folks. You can put your hand up or you can type them in chat. I added a thing in chat. June 15th, that's when we went live with the AFN for all partners. And maybe I can ride on your coattails and just mention that there is a drop-in session in early January. You should have received an email about it, where we'll be talking about some of the things that are coming for the AFN and resource sharing configuration. So stay tuned to that. And David Sharp says, interesting to see the 84% fill rate from the AFN. Monica asks, have you heard much from Racer users about the changes to resource sharing?
Good question. Anecdotally, some, pardon me, are adapting quite nicely. They get it. It's very easy. Others are feeling a little challenged by it. So I think once we start this at Waterloo, we're sort of putting together a bit of a phased-in plan for transitioning away from Racer, and hopefully that plan will start very soon. And as most of you know, we're going to be sharing some of that open access materials as well. So I think we'll hear more then, I think.
A comment from Dan Scott, that ratio roughly matches Laurentian's experience of requests filled by the AFN versus Racer. And important to note, Laurentian is also a Rapid ILL university. And Jeff Sinclair asks, what is Waterloo's digitization workload like for Rapid ILL?
That'll be a Danielle question.
Yeah, we are seeing quite a few digitization requests coming in on our lending side as well. It's quite a bit higher than what we experienced before implementing Rapid ILL, I think. In terms of numbers, maybe 20 requests per day, sometimes a bit more.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. That's all the time we have for today for this session. not just for today. We've got lots of time. Thank you very much, Sam and Danielle.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, Dan has his hand up. I think that's because Dan and David are the next presenters. And there they are. So I'm going to introduce these two fellas. So we're joined with David Sharp from Carleton University and Dan Scott from Laurentian University. And they are here to talk to us about bad, rejected, failed, and ready, acknowledging the unfulfilled and rapid ILL. Never mind the ILL team behind the curtain. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Randy. Can everyone see the screen here?
We sure can.
Oh, great. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. My name is David, and I'm an Access Services Librarian at Carleton University. My title of my presentation is Bad, Rejected, Failed, and Ready, Acknowledging the Unfulfilled and Rapid ILL and AFN. Oops, just 1 second here. Okay, for what is Rapid ILL and AFN? Maybe not everyone's familiar yet, but Rapid ILL is an electronic document delivery service for journal articles and book chapters. We launched it in May at Carleton University. The standard is roughly that you will get the document delivered to you from 24 to 48 hours. Quite often it's quite less than that too as well. Membership in Rapid ILL is pod-based. So what that means is you join one or more pods, which are either geographically associated or academically tiered associated. And we try and fulfill each other's requests on the Bowen and London sides. It's an ex libris add-on, and patrons use Omni to ask for the request. AFN, or Automatic Fulfillment Network, allows patrons to easily make direct requests of books from other members of print libraries. The standard is 3 to 5 days roughly to get it. It is a collaborative features membership, so 16 of us so far are part of AFN. And the patron also uses this, uses Omni to request the item. And at Carleton, we launched this in June. It's a fantastic implementation to Randy and everyone who was involved, both at Carleton and outside of Carleton. But there are a few things contextual for Carleton's experience. First of all, I'm new to the portfolio of interlibrary loans, so I started in July of this year. So it was all a brand new experience for me to get on board for this. Carleton was still operating within a somewhat fluid pandemic staffing environment and a building environment in terms of who was in the building and who was working from home. One of our beloved and more experienced interlibrary loan technicians had just retired prior to July. So we were down a key piece of knowledge management and expertise. Summertime also means staff vacations. So there was a lot of covering for each other to kind of keep the ship going. And it was a new learning curve for many of us after years of experience using Racer. So Rapid ILL and AFN quietly fulfilled a majority of requests, and little ILL staff mediation is needed. So that's the good thing. However, as the volume of the requests increased, the number of mediations also increased, which makes sense. It's exponential. And these result in the need for staff intervention for AFN and Rapid ILL requests that bounce back to ALMA unfulfilled. And they have names such as bad citation, rejected by partner, locate failed. And on a more optimistic note, there was one called ready to be sent that needs mediation as well. The reasons that these can be bounced back to us include missing or erroneous citation or control number information, requests that exceed the fair dealing allowances, patron input errors such as requests for entire digital books to be shipped physically through AFN, requests for books that are non-circulating at partner libraries, and requests generated by the get it link resolver and non-full text indexes. And that one was had a pretty interesting example, one of that, where we had somebody in ProQuest thesis dissertations, and they requested 27 dissertations through the get it link resolver. So it can require mediation to fulfill. So here's a sample screenshot of what it looks like in ALMA on the back end when we see these things bounce back. You can see on the top there's an example of a bad citation coming in our inbox or our queue or a facet. There's an example of rejected by partner. And on the bottom of the screenshot, you can see you're ready to be sent. So the challenge, in late August and early September, our racer requests really spiked up high, and our unfulfilled rapid ILL and AFN requests also increased substantially. In racer, we were used to managing these kind of spikes in mediated requests by reaching out to patrons using the send user alert option, which we can send a message to the patron for more information if we need it. And simultaneously, what this does is it takes it out of the check manual queue. So we know after we've sent a user alert that basically one of our staff members has touched the request, and it's not going to be touched again by another staff patron until we get a response from the a past staff member until we get a response from the patron. In Elma, there's also a way to send messages to patrons too, which we do use if we need further information. But the request remains in the exact same facet, and verifying that a staff member has already reached out to the patron is a several click affair. So the issue is that not that we can't reach out to patrons if we need further information to fulfill the request. The issue is that when we have a pile of requests sitting there, we don't really know which staff member has already touched that request for mediation. There is a way you can do it. I mean, and on the bottom of this screenshot here is there's a way that you can edit the request, go to the attachments tab, click on the ellipses, and then view, and you can see what the message was sent to the patron and what we asked them. But we wanted to brainstorm, and we came up with a solution to try and manage the rejected requests a little bit more efficiently. So in addition to statuses such as bad citation and locate failed, there are many other request statuses that are available in ELMA. Our idea was to not only send the patron a query asking for more information, but also change the status of the request to another holding pen status until we hear back from them. So we use the pending approval status as a holding pen until we hear back from patrons about the needed information so we can fulfill their requests. So on the screenshot here, what you can see is that now we got a pending approval queue now, where we can go back to once we've heard back from the patrons. And on the bottom there as well, I've got a little bit of a screenshot of how we would change the status to a pending approval in the ELMA queue. Don't have much time today, but I just wanted to say a few takeaways and thanks. We rely on the pending approval status less and less as our capacity and experience increases with using rapid ILL and AFN. We try to fix the requests on the spot as much as possible, but this hack didn't help us manage a large influx of problematic requests. And perhaps it's there for us to use again when we return from the holiday breaks, because I don't know how much we're going to be coming back to in terms of bad citations and rejections. The pending approval status may not be right for everyone. ELMA has the ability to configure rules. For instance, the pending approval facet can also be used to configure flag multiple requests by the same patron for copyright clearance reasons. So that's something that we have to consider in the future, whether we would want to use this status for a long term. And then we wait about 30 days for the patron to respond. And if we don't hear from the patron after 30 days, we'll actually delete the request. And I want to thank my Carleton colleagues in interlibrary loans and for their collective knowledge, as well as the support technical services staff and the system staff for their guidance along the way. So if you have any questions about our little workaround, feel free to email me and I'll be happy to take them. Thank you.
I was getting there. I am unmuted. All right. You can hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I'm Dan Scott from Laurentian University. I'd like to thank Joanna and Sue for opening the conference with a Wizard of Oz reference in their presentation title. I'm presenting today from Robinson-Huron Treaty Land in the territory of the Tikmishing and Anishinaabe and Wahnapitae First Nations, and talking about what we have done to basically hide Racer from our patrons. So the goals were, we wanted all of the ILL requests that people are making come into a single interface, right? We're dealing with Rapid ILL and AFN requests, and so it seemed natural to try and bring the ILL requests into Omni as well. We also didn't want to have to continue to maintain a separate Racer account for every user. Not only is that a little bit painstaking on staff side, but it's also problematic when people change names, preferred names, for example. That leads to issues. And we also wanted to prevent users from having to deal with an entirely separate workflow for their ILL requests. So what people see today with an AFN request is get it from another library when there's another Omni institution that owns that. And what they see today when they want to make an ILL request is get it from another library if Omni doesn't hold a copy of what they're looking for. This is in the Laurentian implementation. And we have enabled the blank ILL form. So we're effectively deceiving our patrons. We're pretending that Racer doesn't exist while using it in the back end. It's entirely staff mediated. And I have tried to document this so that other institutions might be able to follow what we're doing, or actually do better than what we're currently doing. So we look for the locate failed. So what David just presented was awesome in terms of sort of the going through the requests and clearing out ones with weird statuses. So we check for locate failed, and that typically indicates that the book wasn't available in the AFN. So then we create a request in Racer. Our staff do that. Staff can then use the add physical item form to create a brief bib record with the call number and the barcode all at once, with that barcode and call number being set to the Racer request number. And we can set the policy and location as well. We then cancel the patron's original ILL request, and we don't bother notifying them. We set that to a particular status. So like David showed, we want to be able to track these in some way, and that's closest status we could figure out for now. And then we have to cancel the workflow request on that brief bib record, because what happens is Alma assumes that you have created this brief bib record. So the first thing it does is it wants to send it back to acquisitions for proper cataloging. We're like, nope, we're happy with this. Thank you very much. So here's that physical form that I mentioned, and you can see you don't need a whole lot of data, and you can actually copy and paste all of it from the patron's original request, which is kind of nice. Clearing the workflow request is just a matter of receiving the item, saying, yeah, we're pretending that we've done this, we're happy. And so the patron's original request appears as an ILL request. You can see that top one is locating an available copy, ILL. So then our next phase is to create a patron physical request for the patron for the local item. So this is going to replace the ILL request in their My Library account. What this also does is that it means that scanning the item once it arrives triggers a hold ready notification for the user. So you don't need to send a query to the patron or send any sort of email. They'll just get the same sort of hold ready notification that they get for AFN requests. We check out the item, and right now we have two policies, ILL and ILL Ontario, with different lengths of time. And it's close enough-ish, but staff can adjust that due date when it gets checked out. Then when the item is returned, we check it back in, and it goes back to the ILL location, indicating that we need to actually mail it back to the supplying library. And then at the same time, when the ILL staff receive it, they delete the item from Alma and they ship the book back to the supplying library. So here's what the patron sees. They see that it is a local request now, and they're told at this point they can go and pick it up at the library. So we've got the caveats that AFN and ILL items have different loan policies, length of time and renewals, but they'll find that out when they pick up their item. For stats, we still need to use Racer's Jasper reports to get the ILL stats, and we're kind of throwing off our local hold statistics. So that's a bit of a trade-off. And a very important caveat is, as Samantha and Danielle and David have mentioned, we also use Rapid ILL which makes much of the workload or diminishes much of the workload. And I'll paste the stats into a chat. Sorry, we are going to ignore that phone call. So thank you, Samantha and Danielle, for your presentation, because we want to follow your lead and actually take out a number of the steps of the workflow that we're currently using, the hacks effectively, because what we're trying to do is parallel what ISO ILL borrowing, how it behaves in ALMA. And I really want you to pay attention to the ILL team behind the curtain, despite the title. And our ILL team is Marlène Bonnet and Rochelle Larcher, who are both awesome. They do ILL, they do all of our technical services, cataloging, processing, acquisitions, etc. And they've been fantastic. And I really should also call out our circulation team. Lauren and Ali have handled the front end aspect of the books. So really appreciate their work as well. So thank you. And hopefully we have some time for questions.
We certainly do. So there's a couple of questions. Ingrid from Ottawa asks, Dan, hold on. Dan, what permissions do ILL staff have?
Permissions that ILL staff have. Well, our ILL staff have a lot of permissions. I can share those with you. It's probably best if I just share them possibly to one of the OCUL CF mailing lists that we have.
Maybe the EAN one?
Sure, that sounds good.
Awesome. And a comment from Jeff. Jeff says, if you create the item via API, ALMA doesn't create the acquisitions work order.
Oh, yes. I'll have to think about whether it's possible to do that easily, because the cost of creating the API workflow, based on, if you see what our stats are, we've handled basically 155 racer requests since we switched to this workflow since September. So it's relatively light in comparison to all of the other requests that we're dealing with.
Awesome. Haley asks, did you or anyone on your team find the transition away from racer difficult?
So I think we are still using Racer. I don't think we've had much of a challenge in terms of users adjusting from Racer. It was mostly a matter of trying to clean up all of the references within our website and email addresses, etc. I think that was maybe one of the largest challenges. Otherwise, people, I think, have adopted the Omni approach relatively quickly.
Awesome. And Dan pasted in a bunch of their stats for the season. So yeah, 155 racer requests since September 1st, Rapid ILL 424 borrowing requests since March, Rapid ILL lending, a few more than that, 941, AFN borrowing requests 1,091, and AFN lending requests 235. So yeah, lots of traffic. We have time for one more question if anyone's interested. Dan,
I mean,
yes.
I think we've got to call out Ian's mention. Goals, improve humanity. Tactics, eliminate racer forever.
I think, Dan, you sort of said, I think you said it well in regards to at the beginning of your presentation where you sort of said, hey, if they're requesting something that's an AFN thing, they click this thing. If they're requesting something that's an ILL thing, they click the same thing, right? And I think that's kind of the goal, is to make it sort of transparent to users about all of our complex workflows behind the scenes and not present them to them if we can.
On that point, the one thing that we need to teach users or help users is the add results beyond Laurentian's collection if they want to find it through a search. That's the one thing that comes out in information literacy sessions or our documentation. So.
Yeah, it's a great point. So a lot of some institutions in OCUL have hidden that. so that users don't even see it. If you're a rapid ILL school, that all of a sudden becomes a very useful box for users, where before, if it's physical things and you couldn't request it from anywhere, not such a useful thing. Okay, thank you, Dan and David. I'm going to toss things over to our friends, our friend Annika, who's going to introduce our final session. Over to you, Annika.
Thanks, Randy. Let me just move things around a little bit. Mark, Anne, and Paige, can you turn on your cameras behind up? That's right. I'm just trying to find everyone.
Sorry, can you see the screen, the PowerPoint?
We can, yes. Thank you.
Okay. And
you need to, oh, there you go. Yeah.
There we go. And is it in presenter mode?
It is now.
Okay. So over to you, Anne.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Well, or good afternoon, depending on what your clock says. My name is Anne Neiman, and I am the adaptive technologist working at Stauffer Library in the Adaptive Technology Center at Queen's University in Kingston. I wanted to start us off with a brief land acknowledgement today, as many of you have done. I'm at Queen's, Paige is at McMaster, Mark, as you know, is at Laurier. I wanted to, because we're all spread out across the province, acknowledge that we are all working within our trusted lands. And we acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We are thankful to be able to work and live in these territories. We are thankful to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who have cared for these territories since time immemorial and continue to contribute to the strength of Ontario and to all communities across the province. Thanks so much for joining our session today. I'm here to introduce you to the Collaborative Futures Accessibility Working Group. And we are going to talk today about the fellowship. We are on a quest for an inclusive Omni and Alma. Next screen, thanks, Mark. We want to acknowledge that many libraries have taken up the call for inclusion and to make things more welcoming for our patrons, our students, our faculty, our users in general. In particular, there's a new decolonizing descriptions working group. I want all of you to try and say that 3 times fast. The road is shared by us all. And here's a slide introducing us, Paige at McMaster, myself at Queen's, Mark at Royer, and we've left a spot open for you because we would like to encourage new members. We would like to encourage you to join us on our crusade as we try to make Omni and Alma and Primo more inclusive and welcoming. And of course, we owe a great deal of thanks to Mandy, our CF coordinator, who brought us all together, who helped us find our way in the early days and helped us navigate. Mandy, we are so grateful for all of your continuing and ongoing help. So our purpose, what are we doing? We are here to work proactively and I know I'm just reading these, but honestly, I promise it'll get more interesting later on. Proactively identify and remove barriers from the user interfaces. And you might have heard that Mark has added a click as he moves those slides. That's there to benefit blind persons who may be listening or working within the work that you're doing. Adding that click is making this slide presentation more accessible. Next slide, please. So our terms of reference. Obviously, we're here to proactively identify and remove barriers. We want to collaborate with others, our partners in projects. We are monitoring and reporting, as we know all of you are doing, and we would like to find a way that we can do that together. We want to recommend enhancements and that list that grows with Ex Libris. How can we make that better for everyone? We want to support our sharing and training amongst our partners and collaborate with other CF groups, our standing committees, the Expert Advisory Network, communities and other organizations. Next slide. Thank you. Who are we accountable to? Well, we report to the Collaborative Futures Discovery and User Accessibility and Discovery Community. We report, and I blew that, Mark.
All right.
I made it to there. I was doing
You're
really
doing
well.
great. You're doing great.
Provide regular updates to our Collaborative Future Steering Committee and so we will provide quarterly reports as well. And our minutes and documents will also be available, are available right now through Spot Docs.
Okay, so and now I'm going to be sharing a bit of a story here about why it's important and why it matters. So in the summer of 2009, and I'm just going to be staying on this one slide. In the summer of 2019, the Laurier Library gave the public a sneak peek of Primo VE, which would later be rebranded Omni. We wanted to gather feedback from the user community about the new discovery layer that would be released across Ontario in the months to come. A Laurier alumnus, who was then also a member of the wider community, came to the library to tell us Omni had problems, and I've been given permission to share her name and role in this story. Ashley Shaw and her guide dog sat down with us in the basement of the Laurier Library and explained the problems Omni was creating for her and her screen reader JAWS. With Ashley's feedback, a fire was awoken at the Laurier Library. We reported the issue to Ex Libris and many more accessibility bugs, probably over 100. And by some measures, this is the most in the world that have been reported. And since then, Ashley has returned to the Laurier as a master's student in the community psychology program. And for the last 8 months, she has joined the Laurier Library as a web accessibility advisor. In that time, she has done many things for the library, including teaching blind and partially sighted high school students from across Canada who were enrolled in a CNIB academic summer camp about how to search Omni to get an accessible PDF from Scholars Portal journals. Not an easy task. She and I have spoken with the Ex Libris product manager and developers about the accessibility of Omni, and she and I addressed the ProQuest Accessibility Council. In all of these conversations, Ashley spoke about making things better in libraries for blind users like herself, but always for the wider community of disabled users. And what have I learned from this? Clearly, things aren't okay in university libraries. The end-to-end user experience of Omni, from searching Omni to reviewing the results to downloading an article, can be a lot better for blind users. And I certainly wonder about the wider community of disabled users too. But I've also learned libraries have the capacity to make things better. People do step forward. People do reach back to give a hand up. And Ex Libris has fixed a lot of the accessibility bugs, while there are many more to be fixed. And this shouldn't surprise any of us. The old that is strong does not wither. And I'm sure for years, disabled people have told folks in libraries that there are problems. And for years, disabled and able-bodied people have been working together to make things better. And while some may quickly turn to costs or focus on the impossible, these folks have to remember that all that is gold does not glitter, and the deep roots of the imagination are not reached by the frost of cynicism. This is why we hear stories of struggles, of progress, and setbacks in the OCUL Accessibility Community's new community development series, which happens every other month on the first available of the day to remind us to think about accessibility from day one. In these events, 2 university libraries in OCUL partner and share their stories with the wider OCUL community. And if you don't know about these meetings, I'll put a link where you can register for the OCUL Accessibility Community in the chat. And we know of the ACE Working Group and the OCUL IR Accessibility Media Group, both on their own roads and on the same quest. And we know folks have been pushing and wrestling with dominant structures outside of any spotlight to make things better for themselves and others. So by creating the Accessibility Working Group focused on Omni and Alma, we can hear voices in Collaborative Futures saying we want to proactively identify and remove obstacles. We want to make sure Omni and Alma have the features disabled users need to access and contribute to our cultural heritage, to share in the experience of using libraries. But to make things better, we have to make a conscious decision to do so. We can't rest on the accomplishments of the past or freeze in the face of complexity or worry about whether our titles have the word accessible in them. And it can't be a grassroots thing. All of us at all levels of organizations, from the pinnacles of OCUL to the rank and file, we have to march onwards together. So we, the initial members of the CF Accessibility Working Group are here to invite the family of OCUL universities to a table, the Omni and Alma Accessibility Table, and together chart a course forward to join up with others already on a quest started long before us, led by disabled students, librarians, staff, and faculty, and of course, alumnus, who go on to be members and leaders in the wider community. We are heading out on a journey that is very collaborative, very innovative, very imaginative, very serious, and very urgent, and sometimes silly. And we expect detours because we know not all those who wander are lost.
The beacons are lit. The fellowship is called. My name is Paige Maylott, and I hail from the libraries of McMaster University. I'm a white passing woman with long green hair. I don a red velvet cloak and have oversized glasses. Before you on the slide is a still from the Lord of the Rings and the majestic peaks of Gondor's White Mountains. A warning beacon blazes with fire. Hail, fellow OCUL Collaborative Futures travelers. I come to you in these dark times with a quest. Slide. As this image of Boromir suggests, one does not simply have an accessible Omni and Alma. Anyone who has worked in accessibility can tell you, no product is universally accessible. Only through collaboration, input, and detailed reporting can we hope to ensure that the products we use and offer are as accessible as possible. Accessible design is an evolving process of adaptation and innovation. Inaccessible aspects of a program are largely identified by our end users, and therefore, when we have more partners and institutions collecting and sharing this feedback, the faster we can collectively work toward a common accessible goal. By working together, we have a greater opportunity to foresee accessible issues before they are reported at your institution, and therefore we can proactively repair them. So, what am I asking of you? Slide. I am asking you to join our collaborative group discussion, our fellowship. As the slide shows, Aragorn brings his lightsaber, Legolas brings his bow tie, and Gimli brings his can of Axe body spray. Pretty sure how that all goes there. And just as each of you brings their own specialties to the table, regardless of your level of accessible education, we seek all champions. Our committee is still working out the details on selecting a meeting platform for this accessibility fellowship, though what we hope is to establish a community of contacts at each institution, champions who are willing to share their local accessibility issues with the group. Should you choose to join, you will be added to a discussion group and invited to attend monthly casual meetings. At these meetings, we can discuss accessibility issues or any other accessibility topics you seek input upon. Bonded in this fellowship, we can identify a wider range of potential issues and be stronger as a group when we report issues. We can coordinate and support each other's tickets, so important fixes we identify are implemented faster. So, will you answer the call and join the fellowship? What say you? Change slide. To pen thy name, one must only take the first step to reach out to one of us. We will send you more details as we develop this communication platform. Huzzah!
That's great. Thank you.
Huzzah, indeed.
Huzzah.
I'm in. You've got to have, it's a pretty good start to the week when you have Red Dwarf, Wizard of Oz, and Fellowship of the Ring wrapped up in the first 2 hours. Thanks very much, Anne, Paige, and Mark for your introduction to our accessibility fellowship. Let me see. And thank you, Mark, you've put a link into the accessibility community, which has those regular calls that you were talking about. We'll open it up for questions now. Maybe I'll start with a bit of a comment that I guess is related to this group, but also all of the other various working groups and subcommittees that have been doing so much work to help coordinate information and activities for us. Firstly, just a huge thank you to everyone who has volunteered for those. It's no small feat to have this as part of your contribution as well, I think. So, and I would encourage everyone to, where you have come across issues or things you want to share with your colleagues, to use the EAN list or get in contact with the various subcommittees and working groups to see if that's something that should be addressed there. So I really look forward to seeing how this particular group comes together and how we can draw on the expertise that's out there and the sort of barriers that people are dealing with locally. I guess one of the first question that I will ask you all is in the work that you have been doing so far, either in the committee, in the working group, or just individually of schools, what sort of what are the major barriers that you've been noticing? And you mentioned a whole list that had been addressed by Ex Libris, but is there a pattern in that at all? And what's the best way for us to sort of address those?
What we noticed at Laurier is a lot of them have to do with the search results page, as well as the full record display. That was what Ashley Shaw drew our attention to. And since then, there's been a lot of improvements on that. I think the key thing is that whatever paths we expect users to be walking down, we walk down too, with various types of assistive technologies that are available, and just trying to detect if there's any of these obvious problems. I think maybe at an organizational level, the challenge is just kind of building up effective communication between university partners. And I think that's what kind of Paige put us as our kind of a next step. How do we effectively communicate that there's an issue, and also when issues are resolved? Because that's if a thing has been blocking a user for a long time, they may stop using that part of Omni, but when it's fixed, we want to get the good word out too.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mark has also added the group's email addresses there, so you can contact them directly if you want to participate or if you have any suggestions. Jeff, your hand is up.
Thanks, Annika. It seems like when we're doing accessibility testing, it's almost like just doing usability testing with identified groups of users who have kind of systematic problems. What are the groups of users that you have mostly been working with?
Well, this group has just kind of got started within the last few months. So I think that's a good question. I've largely been looking at Omni with a screen reader with JAWS, and so with the support of Ashley, she's drawn my attention to things. Ashley's on this call too, but also too with screen magnifiers, so zooming in quite large. Looking at color contrast has been an issue. There's other areas too, things like voice input with a software called Dragon Naturally Speaking. I don't know if Anne wants to comment on that type of interaction, but that would be kind of a thing we need to do to bring to this. So if anyone has skills and any of assistive technology, please, that'd be perfect to have.
Yes, I agree, Mark. It absolutely. Many students use a variety of different adaptive technology or devices as part of their daily working, whether there's mobility challenges, whether there's a speech issue, if we have focus, all kinds of different related issues. We have many students now who are registered with our center who are managing post-concussion. And so there's so many different pieces of how we use these interfaces and the different types of technology that we're using to access those interfaces. And as Mark mentioned, there's screen readers for students with low vision. There's Dragon Naturally Speaking, which is a dictation software. Many people use Dragon to navigate. It's more than just using it for speech to text. They're using it for desktop navigation. And so I need to understand how they're able to navigate within Omni and Alma, and what kind of barriers or roadblocks they may be facing. Is it skipping? Is it moving? Is it not covering where they need to go? And those are just two examples. I hope that helps to answer the question, Jeff.
It does. Thank you very much.
Okay, I don't see any more questions specific to that coming through at the moment. We still have a few minutes left. So thank you very much, Mark, Paige, and Anne for that excellent wrap up to our conference this morning, mini conference this morning. We have a few minutes left. So if there's anyone who has any questions for any of the presenters that have come up while you've been watching, please feel free to put your hand up or type them in the chat box. We'll give a couple of minutes for that. And then maybe Colleen, if you want to, excellent, you've preempted. We've got the feedback survey that's also just been put into the chat. So we would love to hear your experience with the mini conference this time round. If, as we mentioned, there are any presentations that you would like some sort of more in-depth discussion on, we certainly have the opportunity to set up longer discussions on them. We do have, as Randy mentioned, an AFN session planned for January. I'm sure that a lot of people will be interested in that. There's also the regular CAT chats, cataloging chats, and I believe that there's also a session planned for early in the year, date to be decided, from the Discovery and UX subcommittee on the user experience study that was done recently. So if anyone has any suggestions for any of those, please either put them in the feedback survey now or contact us directly. We'd be very happy to facilitate that. And Randy's put in the drop-in session. January 17th is the AFN discussion. And we'll be posting information about this on the EAN listserv, but also on Spot Docs. So if you do not have a Spot Docs account yet and would like one, please feel free to email us. So I'm just going to put the OCUL email address. You can email us and we'll set one up for you. We will also be posting the recording for this meeting and for this mini conference and all of the presentations on the mini conference page that we have on Spot Docs. And if you want to be notified of when that comes out, you can watch the mini conference page and you will be sent an email alert. Do we have any more questions? Finally, I'd just like to thank everyone who has participated, all of our presenters. Thank you for taking the time in December to put together these presentations. I think judging by the number of people that we have online, they're very well received, and I think it's great to have these opportunities to share local experiences. So not just what's happening sort of at the collective level within OCUL CF, but also what individual institutions, partner institutions are doing with the tools as well. Their experience, I think that's invaluable and really so much of what this whole endeavour is about. Thank you also to the conference planning group. So we've got Jordan Bulbrook from Western, Madeline Donnelly from Lakehead, Colleen McKinnon McKinnon from Brock, Sarah Martin from Waterloo, Randy Oldham from Guelph, Monica Reddick from Brock, Jeff Sinclair from Trent, and Liesl Schöner-Saunders from Algoma. Thank you so much for all the time that you put in and for moderating our sessions as well. And of course, thank you all for attending and participating in great discussion, and looking forward to seeing where 2022 takes us. So we can hang around for a few more minutes if anyone's got any questions or comments, but otherwise, thank you all, and we'll see you in the new year.